Greetings and welcome to the 16th or 17th episode of Morrowind Modding Interviews. With me today is Haplo, the project's lead on Tamara Rebuilt. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, starting off, we're going to do just a few basic questions. The first of which is, when did you first start playing Morrowind and the Elder Scrolls in general?
So I was probably about 11 or 12 back in 2002. And I was at the store, and I think it was actually a reward. I was being rewarded by my parents for making good grades in school. Normally I would get a Lego set, but I had been slowly discovering computers. I was getting older, and computers were becoming more mainstream. And my parents said, "Hey, you can buy a computer game if you want." So I had my heart set on Baldur's Gate, and or it could have been Baldur's Gate 2 at that point, actually. And I was set on it, and I walked up to the game section, and of course, back in 2002, there were tons of boxes, and you know, it's not like today where you just have the disc. And I picked it up, and my mom said, "Now spend some time, make sure you get what you want." And of course, you know, I brushed her off, and I thought, "Oh, this is silly, Mother, you don't know anything. I want Baldur's Gate 2." But I took her advice, and I set it down, and I looked at the others, and I came across this game, Morrowind, and you know, as I say, the rest is history. So probably about around my 12th birthday, which is in the middle of summer of 2002, was when I first got Morrowind and was introduced to the Elder Scrolls. And it was the first game that I played, and I haven't played any of the two that preceded it, or the several games that preceded it in the series. But yeah, it was about, almost 13 years ago now.
Oh yeah, you mentioned the cardboard boxes, and you know, that's something I kind of miss, like in the gaming industry, is that back in the day, you went to the store, you looked at all these computer boxes, and they would have this awesome box art, and you'd buy one, and then you could like put it into a shrine. That's what I did. Is like I stacked all my cardboard boxes up together into this large gaming shrine, and you can't really do that anymore with these DVD disc cases.
No, yeah, the shrines. Yep. I also play StarCraft, and they recently came out with StarCraft 2 and a couple other. Well, I say recently, in the past several years, after over a decade of waiting. Luckily, they still came with the full box set and a nice booklet. But you know, I agree. I miss the quality of the construction of the cardboard boxes and the books of information. And you know, I don't care much for the swag that comes with it. You know, a lot of tech things will come with stickers and all that other stuff, but really I care about the book and the story and the you know, when you can feel the quality. You know, I got a cloth map of Ardenfell when I bought Morrowind, and then they moved to paper, and you know, then they moved to not even including a map, and you know, it's just sad to see that kind of thing go down the drain.
Oh yeah, I mean, I loved the maps feature especially, and the map of Ardenfell was just so beautifully detailed, and you didn't really see it as much in the later Elder Scrolls games, not that level of detail anyway. You just have this plain province with a few city names. But Morrowind's map, it was just utterly amazing. You could find almost every dungeon in the game just by examining that little map.
Yeah, I think that's really one of the unique maps of any video game is it's so detailed. And you know, the art style is very cool. And if you're familiar with, anyone has been familiar with Tamriel Rebuilt for several years, they might have seen our claims map, our old claims map. And when that was created, it was done somewhat in the style. We tried to imitate that style because it's just so iconic, and we got close, I think, but there's no copying that style. I think it's pretty unique.
Oh yeah, I used to love the old Tamriel built claims map. I used to like gaze over it and imagine these amazing cities that must be on the mainland.
Yeah, I think we all probably did our fair share of imagining, you know, oh, I can't wait to go up here, and when this place is finished, or when that place is finished, I'm gonna, you know, of course, some people like to go in and imagine themselves ruling cities. Other people probably imagine themselves going around killing everybody in the city, you know. But that's the great thing about the Elder Scrolls is you've got the freedom to play how you want to play.
Oh yeah, definitely. And going into our next question, how did you come up with your forum name?
Right. So this is actually my go-to name for pretty much every non-real life or non-serious uh, interaction that I have. And if anyone is a fan of the Dragonlance series of books, they've probably read some by two authors, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. And those two authors have another series. I'm sure they have several series that they've done together, but there's one series in particular called the Deathgate Cycle, and it's 7 books, and it's medieval fantasy, one or two little elements of sci-fi in there, but the main character of the Deathgate Cycle is a kind of magic humanoid person named Haplo, and that was really my one of my first introductions into fantasy, medieval fantasy, and that kind of thing, and uh, predated all my video game experience, and so I just fell in love with it, and so I thought, Haplo, that's a really cool name, so it's stuck with me ever since.
Oh yeah, I'm familiar with the Dragonlance books. I haven't read any, but my grandmother in particular was a major fan of the series, and I know we have dozens of her books around, and it's one of those interesting fantasy series, I think.
Yeah, it's if you haven't read any, I would definitely recommend it. They have probably close to 300 books in the series now. Um, and from the time I started reading them, probably about age of 10, all the way up to 17 or 18, I had during that time frame, I probably bought and read maybe 70 of the books. Um, they're really awesome, and if you read them, you'll see a lot of uh, names and things that are familiar from the Elder Scrolls series, and you'll be like, oh, okay, so that's you know um, uh, the staff of Magnus and a bunch of other um, magical items are kind of pilfered from Dragonlance, and the the moving city of Valenwood that's kind of taken from Dragonlance as well. There's several different pieces of inspiration from Dragonlance, as there are from any, you know, Dungeons and Dragons, or you get the Forgotten Realms series. Everybody draws inspiration from everybody else.
Well, I certainly didn't realize that how much the Dragonlance series had inspired Morrowind and the Elder Scrolls series. And yeah, my 300 books. Oh, gee, and I thought the Wheel of Time series was pretty bad.
Yeah, I don't think I could imagine reading all 300. I mean, it took me 7 or 8 years to read the 60 or 70 that I did, and those were they're about $6 a book because they're all smaller paperback kind, but they're several hundreds each. So I mean, there's many many authors in this series, no doubt.
Oh yes, I was looking behind me because I'm actually recording this in the library, and I just noticed that there are stacks of Dragonlance books right behind me. First time I've noticed that actually.
Oh, there you go. It's fate.
Oh yes, and sort of moving on. You've been with the Tamaro Built project for a very long time. Can you tell us a bit about how the project started and who some of the founding members were?
Sure. So I wasn't actually around for the very beginning of the project. It started before the game was even released. The game was announced, and forums were created for I guess fans and people to talk about upcoming ideas or mods. And it was announced that the construction set was going to be released as well, which was um, a first for the Elder Scrolls series, and I think probably not the first. I don't know, but it was probably not the first game to release a construction set, but it was one of the first, I think. Um, and so it eventually came to light that they weren't going to be doing the entire province of Morrowind. They were just going to be doing Vardenfell. And uh, one person in particular, he went by the name of Ender, uh, decided that wasn't cool. That was not a cool thing for Bethesda Softworks to be doing. And so he, started up a band of fans, modders, people who wanted to become modders when the game was released, and they said, we're gonna rebuild, we're gonna re-add it to the game, and we're gonna go much further than that. We're gonna build the whole continent in the game because we've got the tools, and that's all we need because we've got passion, and now we've got the tools. So that's really where it started, several months before the game even was released. And I joined in late 2002, so I'd had the game for several months, and it took me several months to really discover the online community, um, and the fact that there were mods in the first place. Because I had installed the construction set because I just installed everything. I was a 12-year-old kid with one of my first video games, so computer games, and I was just installing everything. I said, let's do it all. But I'd never really touched the construction set for several months. And then early or late 2002, I heard about the project Tamriel Rebuilt and joined up because I thought, man, this is awesome. It's huge. I want to be a part of something big. And I didn't really get involved until early 2003, mid 2003. I started contributing to discussions and trying to learn how to make an interior cell for their claims. And really, it wasn't really a claim system then as it is now. TR has a reputation of being very structured and organized, and that wasn't the case way back in the day. Some of the other founding members, I really can't say. Some of the older ones, there was a guy named Draga. Most of these people weren't really known outside of Tamriel Rebuilt, and the original leadership. The project was very, very small for the first year or so. I mean, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen members over the course of the first 2 years, before it really got going.
Oh yeah, you mentioned the lack of a claim system with Tamriel Rebuilt, and I do remember like back in 2003 when I was sort of lurking on the forums that it really kind of seemed like just about anyone could come on, they could claim something and start working right away instead of the sort of more structured form that Tamriel Rebuilt is known for today, with showcases and all these quality controls and reviews and all that sort of stuff.
Exactly, exactly. And even the claim system, just having a claim system in and of itself, went through several iterations. I think one of the first major proponents was a member of the project named Norgrim. He or Noirgrim. I don't really know exactly how you pronounce his name. He was a very old member, a long-standing member of the project, and he was a big proponent of progress and quality, and making great strides toward getting the project finished. And when they first started, the claims really were, it was claim A, claim B, claim C. There wasn't sub-level organization between maps and sections and subsections, and all kinds of lines and organizations and red tape and stuff that you see today.
Oh yeah, it's like Tamriel Rebuilt has gone through a lot of changes over the years, and I imagine that a lot of the original claims probably aren't still in the mod at this point.
That is probably a safe assumption. We don't keep track of that particular statistic, but I know pretty much all of the landscape has been redone once or twice. I mean, there's kind of I wouldn't say it's a running joke within the project, but certainly nobody who's been around for a while would disagree if you were to say that TR doesn't say it's done anything unless it's done that thing 3 or 4 times. We've redone major cities, as I'm sure all the fans are well aware of, several times. Almalexia, Necrom. We're talking about redoing Port Telvanus at some point, long in the future. But landscape has been redone and been detailed. Sometimes detailing phases of the project before release or after release will totally rewrite the landscape. And There are probably a couple interior cells that are still around. I know one of my first interior cells was a shack or a tavern, um, and that's actually still around. Let's see, yeah, I think there was a shack somewhere in Map Two, and I'm pretty sure that shack is still around. But that's one of the few, and that was 2005, so not even one of the earliest ones.
Oh yeah, you mentioned this rebuilding the cities, and I've been looking on the Terraria Built forums for over a decade now, and something I've noticed is that some cities have just been completely wiped out entirely. It's like they were in areas where there weren't actually supposed to be cities, and so they were either gradually destroyed or the interiors were moved elsewhere, and all of this sort of thing.
Yeah, one of the big challenges of a group project, especially one where the membership is so decentralized. We're a global project. I mean, we have people from Russia, we have people from the United States, we have some people from Australia, people from South America and Europe. Everywhere in between. And so, so many people on so many different times of the day as well, and they're all from different callings of life, and so it's very hard to organize that. And I say that kind of as a segue into the challenges of project organization. With a large number of the users in the history of the project, especially, have been younger, and so part of the allure of the project is they want to make something, and really it tends to be, and it's not always the case, but it tends to be the people who have been around for several years, or the people who are older, who tend to focus more on planning, on making sure things make sense, and especially in the older days, we had a big problem of people taking a claim, and they would do a good job on the claim even after we implemented the modder system, the start of 2007. People would still make a good claim. It would be high quality, but they wouldn't spend enough time planning on that. And part of that was their fault, and that they didn't think, okay, well, there doesn't needs to be this awesome statue or ruin because my claim is one cell away from a major town, so it wouldn't make sense. And then part of that is the project's fault, because for years we really suffered from a lack of overarching planning. And I think that's the main reason. I mean, that's definitely the lion's share of the reasoning behind having to redo so many cities and so many things. We make awesome stuff, and then we think about it and realize, oh crap, that doesn't make sense. Or, it's not good to play in. It might look good, but it's not fun to walk around in, or it doesn't make sense because of, this great house or that great house, or the storyline, or there's some part of lore that just totally goes against this. And so that's probably the biggest change in the project over time, is that we've continuously increased the amount of planning that we've done before, and the amount of planning we try to do before we actually get to worlding.
Oh yeah, and I think there was this sort of mentality, early on in Terraria Built that, well, you don't want to be in charge of something boring. If you want to make an exterior claim, you want to build towns, you want to build giant ruins. You don't want to focus on a barren landscape with maybe one cave entrance in it because, well, that might be more realistic. It's not exciting, and I think that was sort of the mentality at the time was that modders just wanted to go wild and build their own thing.
Exactly, and the longest time, we had that. Uh, I don't want to say unfortunate website. We had the previous iteration of our website, which was around for probably far too long. Um, it had a join now section, and it was basically for people who were interested in the project or might be interested, and it talked about you know uh, some of the things that made the project what it is, some of the aspects, what it was like to work there. And in that page there was a section, uh, you know if you like XYZ, then this project is for you. However, if you like to build Bob's amazing flame sword of destruction, and place it in a chest filled with, thousands and thousands of coins of gold in the middle of a city, this mod is probably not for you. Um, so there's always been that sort of awareness that, we know people want to make cool things, and that's actually been a huge point of debate within the project itself is how much of this are we making as a simulation to make it realistic and make sense and believable as a world? How much of the world are we building? And then how much of this is just a game that we're expanding? Do we want to make it fun versus do we want to make it realistic? And to some people, pure realism is fun, and to some people, pure game is fun. So we have to draw that line somewhere. We have to balance the two, and finding that balance, I think, is a major challenge. But I think it's one that we've made a lot of progress on over the years.
Oh yeah, the official line at Terraria Built is that you're sort of building the world as Bethesda would, so it's a sort of a continuation of the game. And also, speaking of your old website, one of the things I really miss about the old website was that awesome intro that you guys had. The one where it played the visuals and the music, and really just sort of immersed you into the epic feel of what Terraria Built was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, the Flash intro. We actually still have that stored. I know I've got it on my backups and on my files, but it's still there. We may upload that to YouTube at some point, I guess, if enough people say that, oh, they miss it or it's nostalgic or something. But there's a big sense of probably people just got tired of it, because anytime they would go to the website, and for people who went to the website often enough, but not often enough for it to be stored in their browser cache, that they could skip it. They probably got tired of it and thought, okay, this is too reminiscent of the old TR. And if you watch it, which obviously I know it's not available now to the general public, but if you recall, there were a lot of it's basically just a slideshow, and all of those screenshots were of old towns and old landscapes that don't actually exist anymore. And so that was um, a big reason why we removed it, is because the graphics and everything were a little dated, but also it was not an accurate representation of the project at the time anymore. It was showing stuff that was no longer part of the project, and so that's mostly why we removed it.
Oh yeah, and Terraria Built has sort of had this problem of having old screenshots on their websites that are not representative of the project anymore. I remember as recently as probably a couple of years ago, there were screenshots of towns that basically no longer existed.
That's true. That's true. And the reason that those stayed up for so long is part is twofold. One, it's tough to get good screenshots. We know that people love the screenshots, and it's one of the larger reasons of why people came to the website, or were redirected to the website in the first place, is that they would search for screenshots, and there would be tons of screenshots that we hosted that would show up in the search results. So we knew that people wanted them, and so we wanted to keep those. We wanted to keep that feature. The problem was we didn't have anyone for a long time willing or capable of taking quality screenshots with good a good setup and good Morrowind INI settings, for the visual aspects of it and all the technical details. There's a lot of magic that you can do. You can work with the initialization file, as well as with MGE and other things like texture packs and things like that, to make it look good. And the other reason that it took so long is what was it? Well, it's the project is always undergoing changes, and so we didn't want to update the screenshots with ones that were going to just be replaced again in a couple weeks or a couple months or something. There's just a big sense of, well, some people liked the screenshots, some people didn't like the screenshots, and some of them were kept up, even though they were that that section of land was redone, they were just really cool screenshots. And so there are some people who said, this is a really cool screenshot. It's one of the reasons that made me join the project in the first place. I know seeing screenshots of Narcissus and seeing screenshots of Almalexia and seeing screenshots of Necrom, just those three cities. I mean, there were probably 2-3 dozen screenshots of those three cities that made at least a dozen modders join the project just on those screenshots alone. So to remove them, I think might have been, a lot of people were against that because they said, well, we don't want to lose that draw. It was a big draw to the project for people to say, oh, look at this awesome thing that people are making. I want to be a part of that. I want to make something awesome and epic like that.
Oh yeah, screenshots even today are an amazing advertising tool. I've been collecting screenshots from my journeys across Tamriel Built, and I've been posting them on Tumblr, Imgur, and Twitter, links to the Tamriel Built website, and they usually get a lot of attention, thousands of views, dozens of notes on Tumblr, and it's still a really good way of getting people aware of the project's existence.
Yeah, there's really no substitute. I mean, I know as a guy, I'm a very visual person. I'm a very visual creature, and so seeing something is really the one of the strongest ways that you can make something resonate with me or make me just art, I think. And it's just, oh, it's so cool to see, like, man, I want to play that. I want to be in that, because if you can make a screenshot look cool, you can make a screenshot look good. You take a snapshot of an awesome world or an awesome representation of something. I think that really increases the desirability of whatever it is you're taking the screenshot of.
Oh yeah, and Tamriel Built has a number of just really amazing works that are just perfect for screenshots, like Comaris, Ban Malar, the Velothi Mountains in general, the Ash Swamp. So many places are just so unique and characteristic of what Tamriel Built has become, and they're beautifully scenic.
Yeah, I think if nothing else, I think the sheer amount of art that we've produced or helped produce, I think has been a big boon to the community, to the modding community, and I think it's also served as a big inspiration for future projects. I know we inspired when Oblivion came out. We inspired a group of modders to start working on province mods, and it was kind of interesting moving into the modding scene of Oblivion, because that of course brought a lot of new people to the genre and to the game, that weren't familiar with Morrowind, and so therefore weren't familiar with Tamriel Rebuilt. And it was interesting to see these people. It's almost like a changing of the guard when you saw different people that hadn't been around for very long become the new giants of the modding community. The projects of the game. You have Better Bodies in Morrowind. You've got I guess Tamriel Rebuilt. You've got what are some? I know Darknuts Greater Dwemer Ruins is a popular one. These Train Wiz is a big person. Princess Stompers made some big things as well. You got the giants of the community, and then you go to Oblivion and you see, okay, these are totally different people. And then when we opened up the Hammerfell project, it was very surreal because there were those people who were crossovers from Morrowind who thought, oh man, this is awesome. The TR team is moving to Oblivion. They're doing an Oblivion mod. This is perfect. And then there were those other people who were like, who are these guys making a Hammerfell mod? That's pretty ambitious, don't you think, guys? And half of us wanted to say, oh, you guys, you don't even know. And then the other half were like, well, I guess we have to start all over with this new community.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Basically, like Tamriel Built was like the origin of province mods. It's basically the first province mod that there was, and every province mod that has come since has, sort of taken at least some influence from Tamriel Built. And these days, when you think of an Elder Scrolls game, you think of province mods. You just automatically assume when a new Elder Scrolls game comes out that there are going to be province mods. There's going to be these large teams working on them. And really, Tamriel Rebuilt is what sort of started it all.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's one of the things that I look forward to most whenever I install a new Elder Scrolls game. I know I haven't actually played any province mods for Skyrim yet. I've got some downloaded and installed from the workshop. I think there's one for Elsewhere, and then a couple, some islands, not really a province mod or anything like that. But I know that's always something that I look forward to, and I, it's hard to measure what kind of effect a project has had, especially across multiple games, unless a modder specifically says in their README or their credits, they say, thank you to, this mod or this person or that person for being a huge inspiration. It's hard to guess that kind of thing. But I and many other people in the project do like to think that we started something special and that we have had an influence on, even if not a direct influence on the number of people who make province mods, maybe an influence on the community as far as what's really possible. It doesn't have to be just, naked people mods or guns or you know, gameplay exploitation mods. It can be, we're going to rebuild a whole continent in the game. We're going to, quadruple, quintuple even the size of the playable game and make it almost make it hard to distinguish between what's mod and what's game. You could do a good job and just really the sky's the limit, honestly. And I think I hope that we made a positive impact in that regard.
Oh, yes, definitely. And, sort of on a similar note, it's like the Morrowind modding community has had a lot of influence on other modding communities as well, I would say, just in general. Like, Morrowind was sort of the advent, the popularization of modding. It's like you had mods that were before Morrowind, but with Morrowind you sort of had this major wave of modding that sort of led to today's major modding communities. I mean, modding is itself practically its own industry now. But that's sort of just, it's developed over time since Morrowind.
That's true. I think maybe Half-Life was the only game that I knew of before Morrowind that supported modding to an extensive amount, and the only other game aside from the Elder Scrolls games that I've really dabbled in any kind of construction kit or creation kit or whatever you want to call it, is Neverwinter Nights. I messed around in that tool set maybe a couple hours, and I just, coming from Morrowind for years, I modded Morrowind for years before I even touched the Neverwinter Nights toolkit, and I just had to give it up because it was just totally different. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like Minecraft, for example. I like that game so much. Is it's very basic. It's very easy to understand. Okay, pick up a block, place a block, and there's just a bunch of type of blocks. I mean, it gets very complex, but I think modding, the ability to have mods, I think is one of the major draws for a game now, because it's a double-edged sword somewhat, because there are a lot of people who complain about that, and they think, well, the developers just aren't trying hard. They're just going to release their tool set and say, let the people who buy the game make all the fixes and make all the cool stuff that we promised. And then there are others who, don't really take that attitude and say, I've always wanted to mod this game. Like, for example, I think there are, and I could be making this up, but I think there are mods for Grand Theft Auto. I played Grand Theft Auto 3, and I played Grand Theft Auto Vice City and San Andreas. And then I played the first Grand Theft Auto, but I don't think there were mods for those games, at least official mods. And I think there are for the fifth one, and I think that's going to be a huge selling point for the PC version that's either recently released or about to be released.
Yeah, definitely. Modding is a really big draw in gaming now. It's like you kind of see it with the recent release of City Skylines, which basically did what SimCity 2013 did, only they embraced the modding community. and they did all these other things, and that's really propelled that game forward a lot. And it's sort of something you have to include in the PC market these days, is some sort of modding tool.
Yes, I've seen. I have not bought the City Skyline game, but I've thought about it very hard because I really want to. I loved the older SimCity games. I think SimCity 2000 was probably the best of the series. Just my opinion, but I think um, Cities Skyline is a pretty fun looking game. There's a guy who uploads. He's kind of like he has a smattering of video offerings on YouTube, but he's recently started doing a Let's Play series of Cities Skylines, and his name's Leif, and it's really cool to see because he goes through an iterative process, and you can see him build stuff and try other things and say, oh, this doesn't work, and then try something else. And there's one or two videos that he has where he just goes into the modding tools and builds his own. I think it's an on ramp or off ramp or something. He has to build a custom design for that. And I thought, that's really cool that they not only do you get to build your own city, but you also get to design. If you want a new building, and if you want a new on ramp, or if you want a new design for something, you can make that. And I did read an Ars Technica article. I believe it was Ars Technica, about a guy who used to work for Maxis, and now is making a living purely off of making new models, new buildings for city skylines. So that's really cool.
Oh yeah, it's just sort of the amounts of moddability that's been added to these, other genres of games that you wouldn't really maybe expect it in, like the sort of the city simulation genre. It might not be the number one genre you think of when you think of mods, but it really does work pretty well.
Yeah, I really think probably just about any game could benefit from modding tools. I mean, whether it's a first-person shooter, whether it's an RPG, an MMO, whether it's a based game, whether it's an arcade, whether a dungeon crawler, any game really. I mean, there's some that are harder than others. I know first-person shooters probably you would have to restrict the modding tools to cosmetic things largely, or maybe new maps would be cool, to avoid exploits and hacking, and all those complaints that you get anyway. And MMOs would probably be pretty hard too. I mean, there are community marketplaces where you can submit things in some games, some custom creations for the community to use, but really any genre I think would benefit from modding tools, because it opens up a new avenue of interaction, and a new way to play the game, and draws new customers, because there are no doubt any game there are people who almost buy it and then say, well, it's not quite what I want, or I like it, but I wish it had this, or I wish it had that. And then when you add modding tools in, that takes care of that problem for you, and so those people go from almost having bought it to having bought it.
Exactly. I mean, it's a really good decision to include modding tools from a business perspective and from a, sort of gamer friendliness perspective. But sort of getting back on track with our questions, we've sort of been going off track and jumping here and there. My next question is, what exactly is your job at Tower Rebuilt? Is there a particular role that you do?
Well, lately, for the past year or so, I've taken uh, a much further in the shadows kind of position. Originally, I was a reviewer. I did interiors, and I did literature, and I did exteriors, and then I became a reviewer, and then I became an exterior reviewer, and I became the head of uh, exteriors for a time, and I was the head of um, the data files. I never really created objects, or I wasn't a modeler or a texture artist or anything like that, but I was in charge of managing them. Part of that came from a time, this is sort of an inside story that some people don't really know. There's been a lot of turmoil within the project, as you would expect, or as you might expect from any long-standing team of many people. There are times when things just kind of, things just hit the fan, so to speak. And one of those times, there was a guy who was basically kind of dragging his feet in a leadership position, and he was kind of asked to stand down and relinquish his files and all of his work to someone else, because it was just, we hate to do it, but sometimes we have to. And he kept dragging his feet. And so another member and I kind of said, forget it. We're gonna do this ourselves. We're gonna gather all the data that we can from the forums. Luckily, all the work that's done on the project is handled through the forums. So there's always a record of something, and there's always, any file that's worked on is uploaded to the forums. And so that's a good way for us to always keep track of work and go back and check, okay, this was done then, and this was done at that time. And so this other member and I kind of got together and rebuilt all of our data files from scratch. And I don't mean remodeled them, but we re-downloaded, we recollected all of the files. And I think that was one of the, we were able to do it in a day or two, whereas the person dragging their feet was saying it was going to take weeks and weeks to aggregate all this data. And so that burst of efficiency, I think, was one of the first times that made me think, okay, I could maybe do this or manage this or organize it, because that part wasn't very difficult. And then eventually I became an administrator, a project lead, and I was doing that for several years. And then we decided to split off our Oblivion project and our Morrowind project at that time. And so I became the project lead for Morrowind, and Lady Nerevar, which many people might know, a huge lore buff in the community for many years now. She kind of took over the Hammerfell project, the Oblivion mod, and that kind of folded off into her own kind of separate from TR project. And most recently, we had a project restructuring probably a year or two ago, where we don't really have the standard administrators and global moderators and then members. Now we have everyone's a developer, and then there are our senior developers who have been around for a while and are so to speak experts in their field. And then there's one person who is for each kind of section who's a lead developer, but all lead developers and administrators and global moderators are all lead developers. They're equal. So there's not really a leadership, like a one leader person anymore. My role specifically is basically forum maintenance. I handle the hosting. I act as a liaison for hosting the website, and other things. I help out with the all the accounts across different social media sites. But I've largely taken a backseat to the role. Just time goes on and things get hectic, and life has been pretty busy for me. So I haven't begrudged losing the day-to-day operations to other people in the project, because they're doing a fine job.
Now, that's pretty interesting, because you're still kind of seen as the figurehead of Tamriel Built. I mean, when people think of the leadership, they typically think of you. And, web hosting, I thought the web hosting was done by, I think it was Garfield. And I'm kind of surprised that you're sort of focusing on that now.
Right. He is the webmaster. And this is something that he's always done out of, I guess he's done it sort of pro bono, because we never we didn't enter into a contractual agreement or anything with him. He didn't say, okay, you guys pay us this much money and we'll host for you. He basically was a fan of the project and hosted it out of goodwill. And several years back, actually, we won a contest on ModDB for, I think they had an annual contest. We won a couple years, but the first year was we won first place for it's the first place for mod, the best mod, I think, for a fantasy game or for an RPG, best RPG mod, I think it was. And if you go on the website ModDB, you might be able to find a record of this. But the prize winnings basically equaled out to $2,000 to $3,000, and there was a big conundrum of what to do with this money because we didn't want to just. I mean, if we accepted it as a project, who was it going to go to? We couldn't just dole it out among the members because then everybody would get $1 just about, and it would be hard to say, okay, well, who counts as a member, and this, that, and the other. And so what we ended up deciding was we decided that we would donate that money to Garfield for all of the services that he had done, given us in the past, and all the work that he had put forward to and helping get us on this track to begin with. And so he was very appreciative of that. And I think that's really the only option we had as far as accepting that money, because when you think about it, it sounds nice, but there's no way that any one or two people or even group of people could have accepted that prize money. But I'm digressing a little bit here. Garfield is also very busy. He's a full-time I believe game developer at a smaller company. I think he's deciding in the middle of determining whether or not to move back to another country again. So things have been very hectic with him, and I kind of act as a project liaison between him and the rest of the project, and I handle paying for the web host and domain registrations and re-registrations and all that. Sometimes I still interact with the project and the day-to-day operations and join in on Skype meetings and planning, but for the vast majority of the work, that's hands off for me these days.
Very interesting. And the ModDB award you mentioned, that's probably the Mod of the Year award that they do on an annual basis. I know a few other Morrowind mods have been up for it at one time or another. I think Morrowind Rebirth actually won 1 year, and it's been interesting to see Morrowind mods featured in that category and sort of given this extra attention. But going into sort of the money issue there a bit, this goes into one of my future questions. And, TerraRebuilt once had a donation option for a very short period of time to cover web hosting fees. And would you ever consider accepting donations again? I imagine there are many people who would like to help out with such a massive project, but don't have, the modding skills necessary. And donations could be used to get additional assets and models, perhaps from a professional modelers, that could no doubt be used in parts of the mainland that haven't really seen full asset production, like Great House Dres in Southern Morrowind.
Right. And this has been a big topic of debate at various points throughout the project. Of course, there are some people who always thought, no, we don't need to have any kind of donations. We don't like it. It just rubs us the wrong way. And then there are some people who think, yeah, we should just always have it open. The compromise that we ended up on was we'll leave. We set a goal, I think, of $600, and that goal should have, I think at the time that goal guaranteed us hosting for 10 years from that point. I think it started around 2007 or no, 2008, maybe 2009 was when we first started that. And we met that goal, and the compromise was we will turn it off at $1,000, and anything after the $600 will be donated to the person who basically wrote all of the code for the website and for our modding system and our claims browser, which is a very complicated piece of work, and normally would cost much more than the total amount that we ended up donating to him. The guy, his internet handle was Zephyr, and so he was a member and administrator for a long time at TR. And so we ended up donating $450 to him. He didn't expect that at all. He did this, he wrote all this code while he was in college, learning while he was in secondary education and in university, and learning how to code for a project that he loves. And so when we contacted him, um, saying, "Hey, we've got this kind of as a several years late thank you gift," he was, shocked to say the least, because I mean, $450, even if you are an adult and draw a salaried in a salaried position, that's still a nice lump sum of money, um, even if it's just to pay off a bill or something. But um, so whether or not we would open that up again, that's really a question for the team. It would have to be discussed, no doubt. As far as individual, donations for individual, or to get individual people to come, um, that is an even stickier debate as far as ethics go, um, because at that point we're basically paying people to mod, and I think there are also some legal issues there, and that people can't profit from making assets for Morrowind. I think that violates the end user license agreement. And so if we were to do that, Bethesda might have grounds to shut us down, or at least make us stop doing that. Because the moment you pay somebody for an asset, they're basically profiting from the game. They're making profit from the game. And I mean, we haven't obviously paid for any legal counsel on that, but I think the uh, the armchair lawyer, the best armchair lawyer interpretations of the EULA and legal precedents is that that wouldn't really be okay.
Oh yeah, and that's a sort of an interesting point, especially since modding itself is sort of going towards this monetization scheme, especially with the recent Steam announcement, sort of monetizing modding for mods on the Steam Workshop. That's actually a topic we're going to be covering in the first episode of Morrowind Modding Podcast, though, so I don't want to get too much into it here. But going on to a few more personal questions, what draws you to modding video games?
I think the thing that draws me most to modding is that it's a form of expression. It's really about creativity. Growing up, I was always a big fan of putting things together. I'm a very kinesthetic learner, which means I like to learn hands-on. I like to do things to learn them, and I like to have fun by putting things together as well. And so um, from a very young age, I had Legos, I had Lincoln Logs, I had Kinects, I had Tinker Toys. Some of these might sound totally alien to you, but some of them, you might recognize them all. I don't know, but basically, they're all variations of the same thing. Little modular pieces that you can put together to make cool designs or structures or vehicles. And then, of course, I like to build my own computers, and I like to take things apart and understand how they work. And I think modding is basically the ultimate form of that in computer games. You get to see the world from the developer's point of view. You get to see how things work, how games work. You get to see the underpinnings, the the base of the game, so to speak, that it all rests upon. You get to make adjustments, and there's a little bit of a power trip feeling there, because you make your first change in a game, and you're like, whoa, that it kind of sets off a light bulb, and you're like, man, I could do so much with this. Like, that was easy. I changed this guy's name, or I gave this person tons of gold, or I put in a velociraptor into my Morrowind game, or whatever you end up doing. But um, I think it just adds that ownership feeling. People love to, as much as people have lauded the streaming services out there. Now you stream music. You don't really buy it and download it anymore. You stream television shows. You stream. Netflix is huge. You've got movies. You got music. You've got even Adobe. Is moving all their services to the cloud. You've got Creative Cloud now. You don't buy Photoshop. You just rent it. And um, I think that's the wrong way to do things. I prefer ownership, and I think modding gives you that extra sense of ownership, and it gives you pride in what you build because not only is this game fun that you've bought, but you're also getting extra enjoyment out of it by making new parts of the game, and you're getting additional pride in owning that game because you say, oh, look at this game, I've made part of this game. I've made, part of what makes this game great is the community, and I've contributed to that. Even if it's something that you never release to the public, you can look at it and be proud and think, I did that. I think that's really, really cool.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it's basically you're making Morrowind your own Morrowind. Your Morrowind is unique. It's not going to look like anyone else's Morrowind. And that's just a really special aspect to modding. I know I actually keep a lot of my dead projects enabled in my save games, just so I can sort of, walk around in them and check out the things I've built and, just sort of take pride in that aspect.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I haven't done many mods of my own. I've done a couple, but I do the same thing. I often leave them checked in my load list just so that I can see it when I pass by it in game, or if I go to it, I can say, oh yeah, this is still here. I still got it. I can walk around and remember. Oh, I remember putting that there. I remember placing this, and of course, I'm a very critical person, so I often see more bugs than cool features. I'm like, oh, I can't believe I missed that, or I can't believe I made this and I thought it was good. So there's a double-edged sword there too.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's always easier for creators to see the flaws in their own works than, well, the beauty of the overall project. But sort of, this leads me into another question. And, you're best known as being sort of the figurehead of Tamari Built, as I mentioned before. But have you ever made any mods outside of the Tamari Built project? And if so, what were they?
So for Morrowind, I haven't released anything on my own. As far as making projects, I've made, and this is sort of a funny story. My very first mod was I added an interior. I didn't really get the concept of how modding worked, about how interiors and exteriors were like separate world spaces in the construction set in the game. And so I added an interior room. It was just a couple tile set pieces. I think I made a 2x3 uh, room in the Valathi tile set, and I just plopped it right down in the plaza in Balmora, right in front of the outfitter there. Um, on the west coast, and because I thought, this is a great spot. This is where I dump all my stuff on the ground anyway. So let me just make a house here so I can put my stuff. I hadn't gone through the Great House quest line, so I didn't have a stronghold. I hadn't killed anybody to take over their house yet, so I was looking for a place to stash and stash my loot and call my own. And so I plopped that interior down in the plaza, and I thought this looks weird. I can see inside of it. I can see into the room, but that's weird. There's no door. How did that? And I thought, how did the game creators make that work? Do I need to find walls and just place walls around, and then I could walk into the room, but then I turn around and I was trapped. And that was coincidentally that was the first time I discovered the console as well, being able to toggle collision. Um, and so I look back on it now and I just think it's hilarious because I totally didn't. And then I go from not understanding how the cells work at all, like not even understanding it one bit, to becoming a project lead of one of the biggest modding projects of any game in the history of games. And I think that's a huge transformation, and it's really all because of the construction set. Another one of my mods was I made this island off the coast of Nissus, I think, and I called it Haven. And it was planned to be my kind of uh, introduction, my self introduction to every aspect of modding within the construction set. It was where I was going to learn exterior work. It was where I was going to learn interior work is where it's going to learn quest writing and dialogue and filters and everything that you could do in the construction set. So I really only made a small Hlaalu town section. I plan to have a section for every major architecture set, but it's woefully incomplete. And yeah, I think there are a couple screenshots if you can dig in the forums and find my showcase thread. Um, you can see some screenshots of it, but it's woefully incomplete, and it has remained so for many years now. But I think those two mods are really the only two that I've done on my own. Come to think of it.
Oh yeah, you mentioned that sort of figuring out how the cells work by accident, placing an interior in the sort of the exterior cell, and I had the same thing. That's sort of how I started learning the construction set. Is that I tried to place down an interior and the exterior, and at the time I didn't even really realize how the camera rotated. So I didn't know how to rotate the camera. I knew how to zoom in and out. So what I thought was the ground was actually about 100 feet in the air. So I get in game and I see the interior 100 feet above the ground. And it's these small things that you learn the construction set gradually.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. Even going back now, I mean, it's so easy for me to traverse the construction set now compared to the first couple of years. I mean, I was still learning some of the quirks, and you get really good with the construction set at a project like TR or any of the province mods or any long time modder. I mean, you get really good at it because you do so much work in it, and you're spending so much time doing so many things. And I think as a project lead, it gives you an even better understanding of some of the quirks because you move outside of your own area of expertise. Some people are only interior makers, some people are only landscapers, and so that's what they focus on, and they do great work there. But I think as a project lead or a section lead or any kind of leadership position or management position, you tend to broaden your field. You do less focused specialization work and more broad planning and overarching work. And so I think all of that stuff combined has given me a much greater command over the controls and the quirks and the inner workings of the construction set over all these years.
Oh yeah, and just simple things like figuring out the organization of objects and stuff like that. It really makes modding a lot easier. For beginners, it's figuring out where all this stuff is. That's really difficult. Like, you might not know that the north marker is in the statics menu, or you might not know that all the correlations between DP, DR, and the fact that, a lot of basic flora ingredient items are actually found in containers, like mushrooms. You'd expect it to actually be in statics under flora, but it's actually just sort of off in containers and stuff like that.
Right. The organization and the naming schemes, especially, I think, are the two big puzzle makers within the construction set. My biggest beef, aside from, I would have to say, my two biggest beefs from a developer point of view. Well, two of my biggest. I could probably make a list for days, but the first one would be the uneven surfaces in poor Dunmer furniture. The DE_P, that line, all the surfaces like tables and chairs and stools and whatnot, all the surfaces are uneven, which, when you think about it, probably was kind of a pain to make in the first place for the modeler, and then for the developer to place objects on that. At Tamriel Rebuilt, we really care about quality, and so there's no physics engine, so we have to place things manually. So tilting and rotating objects is really a pain, and so much so that modders, people who want to do interior modding, have to show, at Tamriel Rebuilt anyway, they have to show they're able to do that efficiently, effectively, before they're promoted, before they're allowed to become a developer. The other thing is probably the confusing nature of unique versus universal items. There are a couple items like pillows. I know there's one of them. One has the UNI as a prefix, and one has UNI as a suffix. And you're not supposed to use the one with UNI as a suffix, I believe, because that's unique. But UNI as a prefix means universal. And so there's really, I mean, this isn't documented anywhere. It's just time spent in the construction set and years spent modding to where you learn these things, and you're just like, you know, they really could have done a much better job of being clear about some things like that.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I believe Terra Rebuilt requires for interior showcases about at least 10 to 15 items placed on the uneven DP furniture. And I believe it's recommended to use wireframe mode for that. And this sort of brings me to another question that's further down our question list. But if you could make a single change to the capabilities of the construction set, what would it be?
That's a tough one. I, I would probably be torn between adding physics, and I know these are probably huge changes, but adding physics, some kind of just where they land and rest properly. Doesn't have to be complex ragdoll physics or physics that can handle water and wind or anything like that, but um, just things coming to rest properly, just having a focal point of maybe gravity or something. Um, that would be a big improvement. It would certainly save a lot of time for us. Or the one of the features that Oblivion introduced and they improved upon in Skyrim is allowing water height to be set per cell. In Morrowind, you have water at one height everywhere in the world. So if you want water at a different height, you're out of luck, or you have to use the fake water statics. I mean, luckily, uh, the modder dongle, uh, and it's kind of a funny name, but if it weren't for him, I mean, the community would be so much further behind because his contributions to the community were just amazing, and he's best known probably for his water meshes. Um, and that they look like water and you can stand in them, you can step through them, as long as you're not too far below them, it'll look just like water. And we've had to use that so many times. I mean, all of his meshes, and there have been some improvements made over the years, but I think probably the number one change I would make is the ability to set different water heights based on what cell you're in.
Oh yeah, and well, the physics thing, it's sort of interesting because that ragtime physics in Skyrim is kind of a pain with interior decorating. You decorate an interior in the Skyrim creation kit, and then you go in, and all of a sudden all these items explode everywhere because maybe they were placed too close together and the ragdoll physics took effect. But the thing you mentioned about the water heights, that's been a really big limitation for like Terra Rebuilt because you guys do use like multiple levels of water a lot, only you've had to use like dongles meshes as you mentioned, and especially in the northern Velothi Mountains. And while it looks exactly like water, it's kind of dependent on how water looks in vanilla Morrowind, and it doesn't really match up with what it looks like with like say MGE, XE, and these newer graphical capabilities.
That's right. It's really, I mean, luckily the vanilla game also came with, waterfall meshes, and those were activators as well because they're animated, and we've used those so many times. In fact, we kind of got a little carried away, and we had to go through and go on a waterfall cleansing spree. We just got, I guess, caught up with how good waterfalls look individually, and we ended up with something like, I don't know, 100 instances of waterfalls in a single map, a single area. And so we're like, okay, we've really got to tone this down because as awesome as waterfalls are, they're not this common, and if we have them all over the place in our project, then people are going to get really tired of them. Um, so it has been a very difficult thing, especially like you mentioned in the Velothi Mountains. Um, those are huge mountains, and there's a lot of snow and a lot of ice, and so naturally a lot of water as well in some places. And I know there aren't seasons in Morrowind. At least in the game, there are some mods I think that make some changes like that, but there aren't really true seasons, so we don't have water runoff in the spring or summer or anything like that. But um, we simulate that in some places, especially in the Velothi Mountains. We really we could still use more solutions, more water meshes. So if there's anyone out there wanting to contribute who's listening to this, uh, water meshes, and animated waterfalls and animated pools of water, always welcome. Um, but yeah, it's been a real limitation, and that's something that we're hoping might eventually be fixed, like in OpenMW, for example.
Oh yeah, and you mentioned waterfalls, and I noticed in my playthroughs of Tower Rebuilt that there's still a ton of waterfalls in regions like the Rothrorian region, where it seems like there's plenty of waterfalls just scattered about here and there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we don't get carried away with the waterfalls because it's really tough to maintain your awareness of what what is around you when you're making a mod, or when you're making a claim, for example. So say I've got two cells that I'm building in the middle of we'll take your example, Rothrorian region, and I'm making these two cells, and I think, okay, I'm going to add maybe a waterfall, but I'm going to make this waterfall very hidden. You won't be able to see it until you're right there, right when you come up upon the waterfall. So since that one's so hidden, I'll add another one, maybe on the other cell that's easy to see. So I've got two cells, two waterfalls, not a big deal. But when you multiply that by the hundreds and hundreds of cells that we have, and the scores and scores of different modders who all have different styles and different preferences. Some people might hate waterfalls, and definitely some people love waterfalls. And there are some modders who put waterfalls in every single claim that they work on, which can be a pain sometimes. But they look great in screenshots, and they can look great in game. But when you add everything up together, it really kind of makes a mess of things because you see a waterfall in every cell, and that's just not realistic.
Oh, very good point. And just out of curiosity, do you play mini mods outside of the Tower Rebuilt project?
Actually, I do not. I know this is probably a stereotype for Tamriel Rebuilt modders, but I use the Morrowind code patch. I use uh, MGE. I think MGE XE now. I used MGE without XE for the longest time, but I think I finally upgraded 2 years ago. And I also use a couple HD texture replacers that try to stay very true to they just try to be HD of HD versions of the vanilla textures, and I think that's about it really. There are several mods that I have downloaded in the past, that I would like to play eventually, but I'm waiting to play them with uh, Tamriel Rebuilt, kind of in a somewhat completed stage, at least landscape completed, just because that's when I'm waiting to really get into playing another playthrough. I've done countless playthroughs of Morrowind, and I hop in, regularly to test something or to review something or to run over and check something else. But for another, full on playthrough from the beginning, with all these mods, I'm waiting for a time when Tamriel Rebuilt is closer to completion.
Ah, so sometime in 2050 then.
Yeah, 2050, 2075, about that time. So not very far away at all.
Well, you mentioned that it is kind of a stereotype for Tamari Built, and it's not just Tamari Built, really. It's like all province modders. All the ones I've talked to, it's they stick to their own projects, and they don't really play mini mods outside of the projects. And it's sort of a unique culture onto itself, really.
Right. I think that can be a good thing and a bad thing. Um, I think it can be good in that it helps you focus and it helps keep you uh, on track, so to speak, as far as like for people in province mods. Um, yes, there are many different opinions and many different personalities and styles. but over time, especially, and even more so with a review process, because there's the same people reviewing all the work from different people. Um, Things tend to get a little homogenized, and that can be good for organization and um, for normalization purposes. Of you want a cohesive product. You know, you don't want someone to be walking through your project, your province, and one cell have it look very detailed and lush and forest, you know, and then the next it's kind of more of a hilly plains type thing, even though it's supposed to be the same region, because two different people have, you know, different perspectives on what something should look like. And so it's good in a way to have, I know this is a very broad interpretation of, you know, relative to the topic, but it's good to stay vanilla so that you can focus on making sure that your work works with others, and that your claims match the claims of others. Because sometimes I know that rocks, the popular rocks replacers, actually changes the geometry of the rocks, and so people who have played TR with this rock replacer often report errors, and they're actually not errors with TR. They're errors because the rock replacer changes the geometry of the rocks, and so the models themselves. And so there's nothing we can change on our end. It's something that just has to be, you know, dealt with, or maybe someone wants to make a patch to make that replacer compatible. Likewise, if people mod for a project with texture replacers, they make a landscape that looks great in their texture replacers, but then when you load it up in vanilla, it looks horrendous, or it just doesn't look right. It doesn't fit with the rest of the landscapes around it, because you can tell it's a totally different color palette. You know, everything's totally different. And so that's one of the reasons why we require at Tamriel Rebuilt, and other project mods might do this as well, I'm not sure, but at Tamriel Rebuilt, we require that you do your modding for the project with no outside mods loaded. You can load the official game and its expansions, and you can load any TR asset, but you can't develop with any other mods loaded or anything like that, because there's a chance that it could break something in our mod, or it could just make something not work well, and you'd have to redo your work. And we try to avoid, you know, as often as we redo stuff, we do try to avoid redoing work wherever it's not necessary.
Oh yeah, and a lot of mesh replacers can cause some pretty major issues, like the one you mentioned, I think, was Mountainous Red Mountain, and that sort of just changes all the ash rocks into these sort of gargantuan, very dramatic-looking rocks, but they cause a lot of conflict issues. And as an interior modder, I know I really hate mesh replacers because they sometimes change the size of an object, and when you're building an interior, you really want to make sure that the size of an object stays the same across as many playthroughs as possible. And I know one culprit to this is like the Morrowind Graphics and Sounds Overhaul has a replacer for the Heather container plant, and it basically makes it so that the Heather is like rotated 75 degrees and this sort of weird thing, so it always appears outside of the flower pot that you place it in if you're using vanilla Morrowind. And it causes all these other graphical issues that are just very annoying.
Yeah, and really, the foliage on Flora is really one of the harder things to check for, because especially when you have lots of it together. Like in our we have a region, the Lan Arethan, which is in the Indoril heartland, so to speak. Um, very heavily wooded, very detailed. Uh, it's actually pretty laggy to load it in the construction set, because there's so many references loaded, and there are so many faces, individual faces on objects that have to be displayed, because the Morrowind engine doesn't do a great job with culling um, non-viewable objects. What a lot of engines do these days is they only render the faces of an object that you can see, And the Morrowind engine doesn't do that. It loads every face of an object, whether you can see it or not. Um, so it's very inefficient. It's very heavy on the rendering aspect of that, and so it's tough for us to see. Kind of going back a bit to the foliage, it's tough for us to check to make sure that leaves and branches aren't bleeding into one another, and that rocks. We often place trees and shrubs around rocks, and vice versa. And sometimes we place plants inside as well, but we have to make sure that not only are the trunks of those trees and plants not bleeding into the rocks, but also the leaves and other foliage isn't bleeding into the rocks because, again, that's not realistic. They can bleed into the ground somewhat. The trunks certainly get bled into the ground. They get sunk into the ground somewhat to look realistic, because trees don't rest on top of the ground. They grow out of the ground. Um, and rocks too kind of are very heavy. They're very massive, so they displace dirt. So that stuff looks realistic, but we have to make sure that there's not one leaf somewhere in the corner that's bleeding into a rock or a mountainside or a house or something, because somebody's going to see that someday, and chances are it's going to be the one person who would make a bug report about it, and they're going to report that bug, and we're going to have to fix it. So we try to catch those things beforehand, because we want, I mean, really, we want an error-free product as much as possible, and that's, we probably have a reputation for being very anal retentive about bugs like that, but that's one of the ways that we can tell our product is high quality, is it doesn't have those bugs.
Oh yeah, and speaking of foliage replaces, I think one of the most annoying ones is probably with the bitter coast trees. Because there's these shelf funguses that you can typically attach to like tree trunks, and a lot of the tree replaces for the bitter coast region, they completely change the size of the trees. So depending on which tree replacer you're using, the shelf fungus, gets left hanging out in the air, like with Bungler's Bane, or it gets sunken into the tree, so you don't even see it, and that's a really hard thing to test for.
Yeah, that's really really difficult to catch, and sometimes we'll go through several rounds of testing before, and never catch it, and it'll be reported, months later, and we'll think, how did we miss that? But uh, it is important, playing through, one, having the time to review your own work um, is a big boon, and also having someone else review your work is also a big help, because other people always catch things that you miss. Because I think, and this is true, whether you're writing a paper or creating a piece of art or making a game or something like that, it's, you are used, you make the action, or you make the mistake, but you don't realize you make the mistake, and so it's hard for you to realize that. Whereas someone else comes in and they're not used to what they didn't make it, so they're not used to it, so it's easy for them to be critical. you know they don't have their own bias working against them, so to speak. And it's also very helpful to go in game and run around and look at everything from very awkward perspectives, just so that you can try to find as many errors as possible. Um, One example of this is Bon Malur, the uh, Redoran uh, stronghold in the north of Map 5, in that region up there, looks amazing in screenshots, and it looks amazing at a distance from in-game. And a lot of these errors have since been fixed, but uh, one of the original iterations that a lot of the screenshots are taken from had tons of tiny little errors. I mean, it's so you can't see them in the construction set unless you know exactly what angle to look at. But running around in game, it becomes apparent, because at in game, your camera height is at a fixed height, and if the ground is uneven, it's obvious, because you're getting caught on meshes or bumps or things. You can't jump up to the next level or whatever, and it's easy to see, like, okay, I can't, this is a problem. But in the construction set, you're not limited, you're not constrained by your character's ability to move around. You have a free camera, and so it's easy to kind of forget to go and check stuff kind of at ground level and think, okay, let me go behind this building and look from behind, or let me go from underneath the ground and look up and see if I can see any errors, or let me get right down on top of it and look straight down, rather than let me just look at it from 15 feet away, kind of at head height, and see if it looks okay. So going in game to test is also very, very important.
Oh yeah, with testing games like Morrowind and mods, it's a very intensive process because you kind of have to look at things from every possible angle because a floater or bleeder can it can only be viewable from one direction, and you really have to do like in all degrees testing of everything you place. And sort of going into a more personal question though, this is the last sort of personal question I have for you. Is there any particular type of music you like to listen to while you mod? This is sort of a completely different subject, I know.
Sure, sure. Let's see. I sometimes I like to work in silence, but I do often listen to music. I'm somewhat of a pariah when it comes to. I wouldn't say pariah. I'm an enigma when it comes to musical preferences. I love songs more so than I love artists or genres. With that being said, however, I am a big fan of classical music, especially I like all Russian composers. I think they have a lot of emotion in their work. Also, pieces on piano and pieces on cello are some of my favorites. But I also like, I'll listen to rock. I'll listen to alternative music. I'll listen to electronic. One of my favorite songs. It's actually more of a workout song for me than a modding song. But sometimes when I get into like a modding marathon, I'll need that pump up sound, you know that heavy bass and constant beat. A couple years ago now, the GoPro 3 or GoPro Hero 3 was announced. The sporty body camera that's popular these days. And the YouTube video for the release had a song on there, and I was listening to it, and I was like, man, this is an awesome song. And it's by a group called Overwork. It's one word, and that's work with an E. Um, and it's called Daybreak. And there's a different edit of the song. They released their album called I think that the whole album is called Daybreak, but that one song in particular is very, very awesome. I think it's great if you ever need to get pumped up or go for a run or go work out or anything like that, or just feel epic. It's Daybreak by Overwork, and I think that's one of my individually favorite songs.
It's interesting that you mention, like you said, with the emotional music and stuff like that. It's the interview we did like the other week with Mike and Ike. He was sort of explaining that he doesn't really listen to a whole lot of emotional music while he's modding because the emotion affects the way he builds mods. And have you had a similar experience that the emotion of the music has sort of maybe made you to do changes to what you're working on that you otherwise wouldn't have?
Sure, to an extent. I would say for me, the emotions in music don't affect the modding that I do directly. Um, so, like for example, I wouldn't say that listening to a sad song would make me create something specific um, in Morrowind. It wouldn't make me say, okay, sad music makes me make hills, or like happy music makes me build planes, or anything like that. I think music can affect my mood for sure. I think it can affect me, emotionally. Can just put me in certain moods. Like there's always those songs that make you want to get up and dance, or the songs that make you, like, Jesus, sounds like my dog died or something. Music is very powerful like that. So I do agree. I think it can affect you emotionally, and then I think in turn, so kind of an indirect effect. I think in turn that emotion that you feel from the music can affect, whether you want to do a lot of modding, or maybe you don't feel like modding, or maybe you feel like modding a specific, maybe you opened up the construction set with the intention of working on exteriors, but then your songs started making you feel some certain kind of way, and you decided, man, I don't feel like working on exteriors now. I feel like working on NPCs, or I feel like working on quests or something like that. Or I feel like writing dialogue. This I feel very moved to write beautiful dialogue or something like that. So in a way, I agree. Maybe not exactly the same way as Mike. Yeah, there's definitely emotional uh, overtones to the music that you listen to for sure.
Oh yes, and it's just an aspect I hadn't considered before doing the Mike and I interview. And sort of going into a different topic, we've already kind of covered this previously, but how would you say Taro Built has changed over the years?
So initially, it started out kind of as a group of a small group of people who were like-minded and didn't really have any plans or thoughts between them. They kind of just flew by the seat of their pants, so to speak, and it was sheer dumb luck that the project kind of didn't die out, or it expanded, because there were a couple times where it was resting on the shoulders of one person. Luckily, since then, I think the biggest change overall, the biggest contrast between beginning and now is that it is no longer the mod project, the whole as a project can live on, even if I were to leave, or if someone else, a major leadership member, were to leave, the project would survive, because there's so many people there, and the structure is so thought out, and it's so uh, integral to the system, to the project. It's so developed. I think it's just grown into a huge beast. Not in a bad way or anything like that, but I think it's certainly self-sustaining by now. The project may suffer if a bunch of people leave, but I think it would survive. As far as differences, how the project has changed over time, I think there was a long period where it started, where it was about having a good time, and you know, just being a fun community where people could mod together and learn together, and everything. And I think around 2005, it started getting a little more serious. And then I think the culmination of that was in 2007, when we introduced the modder system. No more can you just walk in and claim something and then disappear out of the blue. Now with the modder system, you have to go through a testing phase, and as you're well aware, you have to be vetted, and you have to show your skills, and show that you're capable of modding at the level of quality that we have come to know and expect from all the province mods, really. And you have to pass that test and be promoted for each section, really. And we work with people as well, but um, it's really gotten very, very quality centric. um, and I think that has actually faded a little bit in recent years. I think it's not to say that the quality level has gone down, but I think the focus on quality and on very rigid, almost unyielding quality control has eased up a little bit. I know I was a major proponent of quality. Another former administrator and reviewer was a big proponent of quality. Zero mistakes kind of outlook on it. Um, Everything has to be exactly perfect. They don't put that much emphasis on it today. There's still a huge emphasis on quality, a huge emphasis on planning more so. I think we've transitioned from focusing almost entirely on quality to focusing almost entirely on planning. So that fervor is still there, it's just switched. And so I think it has become a more fun place to be. I think there's less pressure to make perfect stuff every time, and now you can make mistakes a little bit easier, without as much pressure to fix things and be perfect. But I think the transition lately, and I say lately, but I mean the past several years, past 2 years or so, has been from a focus on quality all the time, every time, planning all the time, every time, which I think is a good destination, especially considering how the project began with its just overarching goal of let's make all of Tamriel. We don't have a goal, we don't have plans, but we're going to do it. Now it's, I mean, there's not whole novels worth of planning material and literature on the forums and Skype meeting minutes and whatnot. I mean, there's so much planning that goes into the smallest detail. It's just incredible. I mean, you think about the the learning curve for games like Eve Online, and you think about all the things you have to learn for that. I mean, all that stuff pales in comparison to the amount of planning and thinking and discussion and debate that goes into you know what side of the river that a town is going to be on. I mean, people have argued for years over whether something should be square or circle, and I'm referring to Almalexia right now, the capital city. There's so many people who think, yeah, it can't be a circle, or it can't be a square, it can't be, boring. It has to be this, that, and the other. And, it's just incredible the amount of discussion and the amount of planning that goes into this mod. I've never seen anything like it.
It's interesting you mentioned the sort of switch between planning. I mean, from quality to planning, and this kind of brings me to another one of my questions. Today Tamriel Built is probably one of the highest quality standard projects out of just about any modding project for the Elder Scrolls games in general. And it certainly has a fairly high bar for new members to pass out of existing mod projects. And you mentioned that the standards have been changed a slight bit, and I've sort of noticed that. And with the recent members that have been promoted for like interior and exterior development, it's like there's a certain room for error. It's like they don't have to fix everything in their showcases now. They just have to fix enough of it to prove that they know what they're doing, so to speak. And is the 3-strike rule, is that still in effect for a showcase?
As far as I know, it's still in effect. I think it's probably not enforced every time, or there's some leeway. It's not set in stone exactly what constitutes a new version. You get 3 attempts, and it's not exactly outlined for every scenario what counts as an attempt. I think originally it was if you upload 3 files of the same thing, and if you haven't fixed all of the major errors by the 3rd file, you have to start over and do a new file, like a new attempt, a new interior or exterior or whatever. And really, I think that was mostly for interior modders only. We never enforced that. I think for exterior modders, maybe once or twice, but I think the vast majority of people who join end up joining as interior modders. So that just understandably is where we see the highest number of everything, really. So I think it's still in effect. I haven't frequented the showcase much lately, but I know there's always been a little bit of leeway, and it really shouldn't be viewed as, and I'm not, I don't think that you're insinuating this, but it shouldn't be viewed. People, if anybody's wondering about joining or ever curious about it, they shouldn't be worried that they're going to have 3 strikes and then they're just out. It's not. It doesn't work that way. The showcase is a teaching institution as well. It's for you to learn how to mod and to get better. Because even if you become a great modder through the showcase and then leave and never contribute to the project, it still benefits us because it just means one more experienced modder in the community, for that pool to grow. So that helps us anyway. But it's only 3 strikes per interior. It's not 3 strikes for you get 3 attempts to join the project and then you're out forever. It's much more lenient than that.
Oh no, I wasn't implying that. I know it's per interior. I guess I didn't say that very clearly. I've actually been a fairly big advocate for people to join Tamriel Built and the other province mods, because it is a very important project, for the community as a whole. And, you sort of mentioned planning earlier, and, as an outside observer, it can be kind of confusing to figure out how the planning process for Tamriel Built works exactly. You've got the master planning discussion, you've got the regional discussions, and then on a smaller scale, you've got the towns, interiors, and all this other stuff. So what exactly is the planning process like for Tamriel Built, and how do you decide what goes into each release?
In a word, I would have to say messy. That is the best word to describe the planning process. It is a big collaborative communal process. And like you mentioned, there is an overarching plan called the master plan. And that's not necessarily one particular document. There is a document out there called the master plan, but that's a very high tier, very high level overarching view of kind of what the project aims to be and what its goals are, and everything else just kind of spiders down from that. It just expands down from that. From the master plan, you have the major regions, and the regions. There are sections in the forum for each of these regions, and they open or close depending on whether we need to work on them at any given time. Um, so anybody can go and join the forum and read these. In case anyone's listening, if you're curious about the progress of any, when a release is going to happen, or when your favorite great house is going to be playable, or any details, are there going to be vampires, or are there going to be werewolves, or are there going to be slowed, walking around in Dres lands or anything like that, go to the forums and read and check. So after you have the regions, then within those regions you have individual towns, and the towns get planned out as well, judging by really the factions, because Morrowind is really a game of factions. It's a game of sides. It's like a many faceted chess game, so to speak. It's about pitting the one side against the other, about the outsider versus the native, and so even on a scale of cities and towns and settlements, all the behavior, how we plan those cities, really revolves around the controlling faction, because it really doesn't matter what you want a city to be like. What matters is any city you take, whether it's Atlanta, the closest major city to me, or like New York City, or Istanbul, or London, anywhere in the world. What matters is who controls that city. So British people control London, obviously. So London is going to be a British city. It's going to have British interests. It's going to have a British military. And so it makes sense. So same thing. Almalexia is an Indoril city. It's the capital of Morrowind, yes, but it's also the major city of Great House Indoril. And so it's going to have major players from that great house, and it's going to have events that are tied to the Indoril quest lines. Same thing for like Firewatch in the northeast coast. That's Imperial. So obviously it's going to have Imperial guilds. It's going to have Imperial interests, Imperial quest lines. They're going to be fighting, politically with the Telvanni nearby. So it's really about, and that's one of the reasons why we split things up into regions, is because it's about who you're dealing with in the region. And I know that's kind of messy, but really that is the best way to describe the planning process. It's just Skype meeting after Skype meeting of topics at hand and forum discussions where we try to come to consensus and decide what makes the most sense, what makes for a compelling storyline, and what's believable, most part.
Oh yes, as you mentioned, Morrowind is very much a game about factions, not just on the large scale, like with the Great Houses, but also on a smaller scale, with factions that sort of conflict with each other, much more so than any of the later Elder Scrolls games. In the later Elder Scrolls games, it's kind of like the factions didn't really matter. And, what I've really been interested in, kind of, is, the development of the city of Narsis, since that's sort of the capital of Great House Hlaalu, and they are very well known for their scheming in politics. And I'm definitely very interested to see how that plays out with the region around Narsis and the capital city there.
Yeah, Narcissus has really gone under several uh, rounds of development. It's been pretty hands off for a while, but the planning is definitely interesting. It is very far south. Luckily, they do have waterways that kind of head toward Narcissus and trade routes, and the Hlaalu are very scheming people. I mean, they always take the strategic uh, view of things. They want to know what can profit them the most, and they're not you know too holy for just about any avenue. I mean, they'll strike you below the belt, they'll strike you in the back, they'll strike you in the front, whatever suits their purpose, so to speak. They're kind of the rogue that has no rules, that follows no rules, when it comes to success and when it comes to securing the future of their house. I mean, each house is ruthless in its own way, but I think House Hlaalu is very unique in that it will not it's not too holy to it doesn't have too high of a sense of itself to stoop to any particular level. It will use whatever means it has at its disposal to complete the task at hand.
Oh yeah, and that really kind of makes them a sort of fascinating house to just kind of observe and get involved with their politics. And I know in Tamara Rebuilt's version, they've sort of been encroaching on Endoral lands to a certain extent, I think.
That's right. They've sensed weakness. I mean, there's been that uh, sort of slow but nonstop slide since the signing of the armistice, when many of the major powers and the major characters in House Indoral committed suicide, or were killed. Um, and there's really, especially with the events of the original game, with Morrowind and with Tribunal as well, there's really a sense of a power struggle in Great House Indoral, because really their whole world, in two major steps, has just crashed down around them, and they're having to reconcile that. And there's debate. There's the original hardliners who are still around, and then there are people who are more moderate, more progressive voices. And while that doesn't necessarily spell doom from within, it does mean that they have focused much of their attention uh, on themselves and getting their house in order, which means other great houses sense weakness, which isn't necessarily to say a weakness in the house's ability to defend itself, but a weakness in that they're distracted. And so Hlaalu is very opportunistic like that. And so they sense an opportunity, they make a bet and a gamble, and they encroach where they can. They are aggressive in their partnership with the Empire, who sort of won. I mean, the armistice was signed, it is a peace treaty, but they pretty much won politically. Maybe not in the hearts and minds of the Morrowind natives, but in the Dunmer. But politically speaking, I mean, imperial law is in effect everywhere, and they have control over mining rights pretty much everywhere, and they have the authority to build forts pretty much everywhere, to move troops freely throughout inside the borders of Morrowind. And House Hlaalu realized that, and they said, "This is the new big player in town, and we're going to side with them, and we're going to use them to our advantage to make aggressive claims and inroads to land that we've always coveted, but Indorel has historically held in check. So I think you'll see a lot of interesting power grabs and power plays, not just between Hlaalu and Indorel, but the Telvanni as well are very expansionary. Dres is very insular, so they're, understandably, they're very paranoid. Um, Redoran is always violent and willing to fight to defend Morrowind and to defend themselves. So you'll see a lot of opportunities for subterfuge, for political maneuvering, and for combat. So I think pretty much everyone has their bases covered with between the five great houses, between combat or uh, or non-combat choices.
This sort of brings me to another question, but you've almost completely answered it already. Can you give us any details or tidbits about what the main Great House storylines are going to be like and how the player is going to experience them?
So I can't speak any specific details. The best without to avoid repeating myself or I have already said things, and to avoid spoilers or misrepresenting the latest decisions. There was a Skype meeting, I think last week, that the minutes have yet to be posted, so I don't want to say anything that is not quite accurate, but I can say that all the minutes, and all of the discussions and all of the Great House uh, planning, so to speak, is available for reading on the forums. I know that kind of defeats the purpose of trying to find hints and spoilers by watching the video here, but um, the best place for that, to learn those things, is probably either the IRC channel that we maintain, or on ChatSpike, or going to the forums and reading that, because there's really no substitute for. I mean, I would have to condense hundreds and hundreds of pages of discussion into a couple minutes of an answer, but it's basically, it would be safe to say, take everything that you know about the great houses from Morrowind and then amplify them, because the houses that you experienced in Vardenfell are just, they're satellite branches at best. The Telvanni on Vardenfell are not as entrenched as any house is not as entrenched on Vardenfell as it is on the mainland. So expect uh, much bigger decisions, decisions with much more gravity, um, bigger quests with bigger consequences, harder choices. There are some choices where you're gonna question the morality of all of them. You're going to be put in sticky binds, and not necessarily with the great houses, but there, some Daedric quests as well, or Daedric related quests. There are going to be some options in some of these where you maybe have to stab your friends in the back a little bit, as an option anyway, or take other unsavory choices, paths, so to speak. So I don't want to spoil anything, but there are some exciting quest lines ahead, so to speak.
Yeah, very interesting. And, as you mentioned, Vardenfell is definitely kind of a satellite realm of Great House politics, since it was only opened up for colonization in 3E417, I believe. So most of those settlements are newer ones that were just part of a land grab by various great houses, and they've only been there for about 10 years. So there's not really all this quite as much entrenchment in politics yet on Vardenfell.
That's right. That's right. And it's interesting to note, I think it's part of the vanilla game, part of the dialogue, where they kind of explain why you only see three of the great houses, specifically why Great House Indoril is not on the mainland, or not on Vardenfell, excuse me. And I think the original line says something like, uh, they didn't have the resources, or the money, or the manpower to expand, or they were just beaten to it, something like that. And I think for the purposes of storyline and cohesiveness, the project has decided that the interpretation that they're going to take, that the project is going to take, is that Great House Indoril just simply wasn't interested at the time. They didn't think that it was that attractive of an option. So we may see something like that start to change, depending on whether you side with progressive members of the Indoril Council, or whether you side with the more hardline conservatives on the behavior that the House is going to take. You may see some of those things that you're used to start to change.
Now, sort of as you mentioned, the Indoril are sort of this really conservative, really religiously oriented house, and it is kind of believable that they wouldn't be that interested in Vvardenfell. I mean, historically, Vvardenfell has been this temple preserve, and you've already kind of got some Indorilan influence there with the the Ordinators and the temple.
That's right. There's a lot of misunderstanding that I see sometimes with how the temple is structured in Ordinators. Indoril is the by far #1 supporter and membership feeder of the temple and of the orders of the Ordinators. A lot of people think, and it doesn't help that I think it's listed as Indoril armor in game, but a lot of people think that Ordinators have to be from Great House Indoril, which is not the case. Any Great House member can join the orders. I think there are several: the Order of the Watch and the Order of War, and a couple others. But they have a lot of influence in the temple and a lot of influence in the orders of the Ordinators, but they're certainly not exclusively Great House Indoril organizations, and they certainly aren't controlled entirely by them. It's more so the other way around, I would say. The temple sort of influences the hardliners in Great House Indoril. They pretty much want to do what is best for the temple, because that's their traditional source of power. Really is the temple and the living gods.
Oh yes, and the power of Indoril, it kind of wanes with the temple as well, because in the third era, that is that well, you sort of see the decline of the tribunal and the living gods, and that power just sort of directly relates to the sort of fall of House Indoril, and it's not just the armistice that is causing this. So the armistice is definitely part of it. It's also the fact that the temple itself is sort of starting to decline.
Yeah, it's crazy when your deities kind of end up getting killed, how your religion kind of falls apart like that. But the temple is definitely in decline, I would say, and that's really causing some major shockwaves in Great House Indoril, and it's hard for them to reconcile that, because even the progressive members, the more new age members in leadership positions, they're still devout worshippers of the temple. They're still the same religion. It's just how far back they want to claim their belief, so to speak. How extreme is their devotion to the temple. Some of the members of the council almost can't function without a temple to lean against, and then others are more contemporary with their belief, and it's a powerful support system, but it's not. There are other ambitions there as well.
Oh yeah, and I imagine we're going to see a lot of that in the faction storyline for House Indoril.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of it is going to be focused on not only the power struggle, but also just having to come to terms with almost living in a new age. I mean, the Tamriel Rebuilt will take place almost concurrently with the original game. So you'll start out in everything takes place starting out in 3E 427, just like the game, the vanilla game, and as the game progresses, you start getting further into the Indoril or quest line, it's going to be more about you know how do we handle this new world without our deities, and how do we handle this new world with new age threats and a newly emboldened uh, adversary on every front, and an ever shrinking base of support, so to speak, with outdated ideals. It's not just about the typical, okay, let's try to cement our house and its power. It's how do we save our house from implosion, in a lot of cases.
Oh yeah, and that is going to be very different from any of the other great houses, since most of them are expanding, except for House Dres, which honestly I'm not really sure what House Dres is doing during this time period.
Yeah, they're really they're very an interesting house, for all the insular and xenophobic talk about House Dres. They're also uh, they're very unified in a way. They they also have unique contact with other continents as well. They trade with the Slode as well. And their airships and whatnot, and their trade ships. So they also have very very detailed and intimate knowledge of Argonians and the province of Argonia. And as you know, that's an area that's kind of ruled by the Hist, and they're kind of an otherworldly being, so to speak. The Hist are, and so the Dres are they're very ancient and they're very old. The people in the council have been around for a long time, and they have a massive amount of knowledge. I mean, in some ways, it's very formidable even to members on the Telvanni Council, who are thousands and thousands of years old in some cases. But I think we pleasantly surprised with the form. I don't want to say formidableness, but with the competence of Great House Dres, for one that seems so backwards and is always portrayed as so dying out, always shrinking. I think people will be surprised at how capable they find Great House Dres when they encounter them for the first time.
Oh yeah, it's definitely not a house I've given a whole lot of thought of before. I definitely never actually considered the fact that they might have contact with the Slode. That's definitely a bit of a new detail for me.
Right. Yeah, that's a major part of their economy, is their trade, um, their intercontinental trade, so to speak. Because again, there is a lot of somewhat justified ill will against them from other provinces in the nation. Obviously, Argonia kind of hates the Dres. Elsewhere as well, kind of hates the Dres. They're notorious for being slave traders, but they're also major agricultural uh, powerhouses, um, and they're also a very strong border against the forces of Argonians to the south, who have invaded several times, who tried to take back land or invade Morrowind. And in fact, they do invade Morrowind, I believe, after the Oblivion Crisis, and take over a huge swath of land north of the edges of the Argon jungle, which just goes to show you how imminent that threat always is. So it's kind of a begrudging existence that they have. They're very aware of their position. The Dres are. They're very aware of where they are geopolitically, and they are not. Um, to use a gaming term, they're not noobs, in the arena, so to speak. They're not level one, walking around trying to figure out the world. They definitely have been around for hundreds and thousands of years, and they know the game. And they're not everybody's favorite player, so to speak, but they're definitely not to be taken lightly.
Oh yes, and is there going to be any trade with Akavir with the Great House Dres? You mentioned their intercontinental trade, and well, Akavir is sort of along that coast there. I mean, obviously thousands of miles away, but they've invaded Morrowind periodically.
That's true. I don't know how much of that will appear in game, or how much of really anything will be playable or experienceable in game. Because again, dress lands are very far away still. It's only the broadest strokes that are being painted now. Um, so that's definitely something to stay tuned for in the future. It's always a possibility. Again, it depends on how how everything goes that precedes it, how quickly things go, how many new uh, models and textures we get for new things. Obviously, we can't represent something or we can't create something in the construction set if we don't have the art files to build it. Um, that's one of the reasons why it's taken so long in the first place is getting a, like you mentioned before, with donations, getting a complete Dres architecture set. We want to do a good job there, so we haven't started yet building things like we would. We would love to start working on Dres lands, but obviously that needs planning and it needs art assets, and so we need at least the assets before we can even physically build stuff, and we need planning before we can do it well. So there definitely be some time before we can answer specific questions about storylines or gameplay aspects or mechanics there.
Oh yes, I know the Dres assets are still very much in production, and I was kind of curious. There used to be, I think that was there used to be earlier assets that were used for Great House Dres, and like there were screenshots of the city of Tyr way back when, and it is kind of a really hard Great House to sort of visualize because there's not that much concept art from the original Morrowind to base the construction of Great House Dres on.
And that's right. It's really the only great house that we have no in-game assets for. Um, Even of course we had the first three with Vardenfell, with the original game, and then with Tribunal we were introduced to Indoral architecture and you know more information about that. I mean, we even visited the capital area of the Indoral in Mournhold, and so Great House Dress is really the only uh, great house where we're having to start completely from scratch as far as art assets go. Um, as anybody who's a fan of Tamriel Rebuilt has seen, we've done great things with the few models that we got from Tribunal. I mean, we built entire cities out of those limited architecture sets. So it's definitely possible with a limited set, but I wouldn't even say we have a limited set for Dres yet. I mean, we have lots of bits and pieces, but nothing yet to make it a cohesive set. Um, so it's very difficult, and it's also like you mentioned, it's difficult to envision what their culture will be like. Personally, I think it's a mix between I would say a weird demon child between Aztec culture and ancient Moroccan culture. Well, I say ancient, but Moroccan culture. I think those two would be a good as far as architecture and personal culture go. I think a mix between those two is probably um, a very accurate representation.
Oh, very interesting. And, sort of going back to some more general tower rebuilt questions. You've been with the project for a really long time. Can you tell us a bit about the history of tower rebuilt, and are there any interesting stories or tidbits of information that aren't very common knowledge? I mean, I know we've already gone over some of the history of tower rebuilt already.
Let's see. Well, as far as the project itself goes, it is interesting. We've switched websites and almost like hosting services several times now. Originally, we had a very basic forum and site on mouse.net, and I don't know if anyone listening will remember that. It's very long ago. And then after a while, we were on RPG Planet, which many more people might recognize. That was a very popular site for games and role-playing games. And you can actually still find remnants of the RPG Planet site on the Internet Archive. And after that, we were hosted by Silgrad Tower for a very long time. And eventually there was a falling out there, a schism, so to speak, between the two projects. And you know, they wanted to fold us into them. We wanted them to fold into us, so to speak. And there were just very creative differences, very big creative differences between how we wanted to go about making the mods. Silgrad Tower focused more on personal expression, and we focused more on a believable experience, as insofar as you couldn't tell it. We wanted to make the game like Bethesda would make it, and they wanted to kind of do their own thing. And so we split from them, and there was a lot of bad blood for several years, and a lot of smearing of names on and the project name as well on both sides, for both Tamriel Rebuilt and its members, and Silgrad Tower and its members. And then after that, let's see. I mean, most of the stuff after that is pretty well documented. We've been on that site since then. Probably, I think 2003. Well, no, 2004, 2005 or so. Was when we really got up and running with this place. 2004, I think. There were some members and some discussions before then, but the vast majority, I think, was around 2004. So the old website and the forums. I say the old website, the old version of the website we have now, and the forums we have now, been around for over a decade, which is a long time, come to think of it. And as far as tidbits of information, not very common knowledge, I can't think of any interesting bits off the top of my head. It is interesting, every so often, every several years, someone will come along and request that we make some history of TR special, or some art book of the history of Tamriel Rebuilt or something like that. And as awesome as that sounds, as nostalgic as that would be, it's, I think, a monumental task that we just don't have the ability to do. With that being said, we do have some aspects of our old work out there. I know we've published an art book, if anyone hasn't seen that yet, an art book of all of the art and anything visual, basically, with regard to, it's just some great artwork. It's published out there. Just Google TR art book. We might even host it on our own website. I'm not sure, but as far as interesting stories or tidbits go, I think that's about it that I can remember. If any come to me, or if any prompts kind of jog my memory, I'll be sure to share them for sure.
Oh yes, it's Tamriel Rebuilt has a very long project history. It's probably the oldest continuously worked on modding project, or at least one of the oldest continuously worked on projects in the history of modding, and there's a lot of rich history there. And I did want to ask you a bit more particularly about the sort of schism between Tamriel Rebuilt and Silgrad Tower, since you both kind of had competing visions of Western Morrowind, and Silgrad Tower, they released their version of like a bit of Western Morrowind with the great city of Silgrad Tower, and it's definitely very different from what you see in the Tamriel Rebuilt Alpha.
Right. So originally, a lot of that land was created for the Tamriel Rebuilt project, and just as an initial kind of, here's the land, it's not quite finished yet. This is basically what it's going to look like, and then all the development for that land was happening within Silgrad Tower, kind of as a standalone mod. And the hope was that Silgrad Tower was a sort of a group of, and there were some people who kind of worked with both teams, but it was sort of a group that had its own vision, and the hope was that when it was finished, it would be compatible with TR, to the point where it could be merged into the mod itself. And so they kind of took their vision and ran with it. And there were there were a lot of arguments back and forth between, well, we don't want you to do this, or you don't want us to do that. And they were arguing from the point of view that eventually Silgrad Tower is going to become part of TR. Excuse me. It's hard to understand arguments from that point of view when that's kind of a future perspective, and especially when it's about your own work. When someone's saying, "I don't like this. Can you change it? Because in the future it's going to look bad, or it's not going to work in the future." And so they kind of said, "Well, we think it's silly to put so much emphasis. It's almost like a lifeless machine-like focus on quality and on lore friendly, and they weren't really focused on lore friendly. I mean, there were in the original Blacklight, there were guards. There was a mixture of, first of all, a mixture of Imperial architecture, Velothi architecture, a couple other architecture sets. It was a mess of architecture sets, and there were Imperial guards, mind you, in full ebony armor, just every like town guards patrolling around. So it wasn't very balanced, and the quality control was just not the same, and so that just led to a lot of bad blood, so to speak, which for the most part was constrained within the forums of Silgrad Tower and of Tamriel Rebuilt, even after the split, the website split. But occasionally it would spill over to the official forums. Back in the day, this was known as the Elder Scrolls forums, or ESF. Now they're, I think, the Bethesda Softworks Game Studio forums, or something, a mouthful like that. But the old folks at TR still call them the ESF, the Elder Scrolls forums, and there would be, eventually, or every so often, Tamriel Rebuilt would post updates and threads announcing new project, new process, progress, excuse me. And we want new modders. This is what we're doing lately, and sometimes Silgrad Tower members would come over and kind of talk bad about our project, and vice versa. When Silgrad Tower would have a post, members from TR would kind of go over there and criticize it and say, well, why is it so non-lore friendly, or why do you not fix any of these bugs, or it was childish behavior on both parts. And there were a couple times when threads kind of developed into flame wars, and forum moderators had to get involved. I don't really know how long it took for that behavior to kind of wean itself away. I know one of the leaders of the Silgrad Tower project went on tour, on a military tour for his whatever nation he's from. So he was away, and things kind of changed, not just for behavior, but everything else, while he was away, and then changed again in a different way when he came back. And I think those two combined had a kind of a paradigm shift on how people thought. And also a lot of people moved on to work on Oblivion as well after this time frame. And so I think there's been, I would say, a reconciliation, but the flame has certainly died down, because I don't know of anyone who really plays Silgrad Tower anymore, or has for years. I think it's always been an unfinished kind of work in progress, which some people at TR would say it's telling that it's a much smaller area, but it's always been unfinished, and it's always remained buggy and unlore friendly. And they say, just let the mod speak for itself. So that's kind of a broad 5-minute overview of the Silgrad Tower and Tamriel rebuilt history.
Oh yes, there's definitely a pretty major difference in quality. I know there's some really great parts of Silgrad Tower, but it's definitely a mixed bag. You've got some more questionable aspects, and it's definitely not very lore friendly. And just you mentioned Blacklight, and well, the download for Blacklight is still on Rowan Modding History, I believe, and it's way, way different from what Ban Milar is today. I mean, it's that sort of imperial city, and Ban Milar is very much a Rodoran city. And then you have Reach Parkeep, which I think today is Cormeus View, or something of that nature.
Right. I think the Parkeep is a different town. I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that's a different one that's been totally redone in the Redoran tile set. Cormaris View, which is now Cormaris, I believe, is an imperial town, imperial fishing town or mining town. I think it's a fishing town on a lake. And if you go to our channel on YouTube, you can see Tyrion does a kind of a video where he reviews that claim in the video. And that's I'm pretty sure that's an imperial town. And it's further north, I believe, than the Parkeep town, which has been renamed, but I think at one point we were calling it Soluth, and then we decided to change it more recently than that. But our names change a lot for stuff we haven't yet built, so or regions we haven't yet completed as far as planning goes. So that name could change yet again, as far as I know. I mean, we're in the process of changing names for our indoor lands in some places, some settlements now. So there's definitely no guarantee that names will ever stay the same unless they're absolutely cemented in lore.
Oh yes, I sort of noticed that there was a naming thread in the forums where there was a lot of suggestions for changing names here and there. And sort of going back to Silgrad Tower, I don't believe they're still active, are they?
As far as I know, they're not active in Morrowind, and I'm pretty sure they're not active in Oblivion. They may have moved on to Skyrim. I honestly don't know. I haven't visited their forums in 7 years, I think, probably. I mean, it's been years and years since I've even visited the site or forum. So I know they're not active in Morrowind, and pretty sure they're not active in Oblivion anymore. But they may have moved on to Skyrim.
It's just something I was curious about because I haven't really heard from them in several years. I know they used to have several projects going on. But anyway, back to Terra Rebuilt related things. Well, the Terra Rebuilt team last made a public release back in August with the big alpha. And are there any new releases in production right now? And when might we see them?
So there's nothing new as of this moment, as far as I know. The big change though is that we've moved to a rolling release. It's not, historically we released, one map, and then we were pretty much done with that map, and we then moved on to another map, and we would release bug fixes and patches, but no big changes. No big additions until we got to the next map, and then we'd repeat the whole process over again. And while that has its advantages, it also has its disadvantages. And so these days we pretty much go and we have just an ongoing file, and we will release that as time goes on at various intervals whenever sizable updates have been made. The reason it seems nothing has been released in a long time is because a ton of the work has been the kind that it's reorganizing work where you make a change and it throws everything out of sync until you go and fix all of those idiosyncrasies. And so we're still in the process of that. And the lion's share of time spent on the project, I think, has been in planning lately. So there hasn't been as much there hasn't been the flurry of world building activity, which is it's harder to you can't have a meeting and then release the meeting resolution as an update, if that makes sense. It's easier to release, oh, we added a new landmass. That counts as a release, but you can't say, oh, we met 37 times over the past 6 months and came up with lots and lots of ideas. You can't release that. I mean, you can talk about it, but it's harder to kind of communicate that to the player unless it's in the form of playable content.
Oh yeah, definitely. That does kind of seem a bit hard to explain. And the alpha build, is that based on more recent work, or is that more or less stuff that was like finished a couple of years before the release in August?
Yeah, there's definitely been work since then. The alpha is the file. If you're talking about the map 4 alpha, like the Heartland alpha, that's kind of a separate file that we released concurrently with our rolling release. One of the first versions of our rolling release, like major conglomerate file, so to speak. It wasn't quite ready. The alpha wasn't quite ready to be included in the rolling release, so it wasn't quite beta material. It wasn't playable, but and by playable I mean there weren't experiences for you. You could walk around in the alpha, but tons of bugs, things might change, etc. Um, and so what we wanted to do was just release it and get it out there and show people what we had done, um, just to kind of to combat the aging fatigue of our previous release. We didn't want people to go too long without seeing our release, or to say, okay, well, they've had this landscape done for so long, why don't they release it? We decided, why not just release everything at the same time, but be clear about its level of completion, so to speak. The next time that the reason why that hasn't been updated is because that kind of content is ideally folded into our rolling release as we get to it. We'd rather not work on two files separately and then have to make the remake all the changes in the alpha file that we made, and then remake those changes in the actually rolling release file. The word escapes me right now. Basically, we want to make sure that work doesn't have to happen twice, if that makes any sense. So we fold that file into the rolling release when it's ready, and the rolling release is the file that will be updated more or less in a kind of piecemeal fashion. You'll just see new versions of that file, and they'll be named for the date rather than the date that they're released, rather than this is map 1 Telvanus, or this is map 2 Antediluvian Secrets, or whatever, if that makes any sense.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned with the alpha, you were trying to combat the sort of fatigue that things weren't getting done and released. With releasing the landmass. And what strikes me as well, kind of amusing, is that people still don't think there's enough getting done. It's like every time I post a Tamaro built trailer of the alpha, and even though I explicitly mention that it's for the alpha, it's like I still get these comments about people complaining about how empty the land is, and it's like, where's the NPCs and where's the quests? And even though it's the alpha and all that stuff is, in the older maps of Tamaro built.
Yeah, that's one of the things that comes with making a product for the public, is there's always going to be people who are impatient, or who don't quite understand, or who don't care to understand, and just they want everything. They say, some people think they want us to give them day-to-day updates, and oh, today we added this NPC and tomorrow we're going to add that NPC, and they want that play-by-play update. And then there are some people who say, don't tell me anything about it until it's released and ready. I don't want anything to do with it. It's just like Steam betas, or greenlit games in Steam. Some people hate the idea of paying for public access early on. Some people hate the idea of paying money for a beta. Um, Other people love it. They say, I've got money to spend. I'll spend $30 on the beta and then another $50 when the game comes out because I get to play it earlier. It's just different groups of people, and it's always going to be a struggle to reconcile the two. That's the word I was looking for earlier, talking about the alpha and the rolling release. It's hard to reconcile the two.
Oh yeah, and it's definitely hard to please everyone with a major project like Terraria built. And well, sort of going into that, I'm sure a lot of people are kind of curious about the status of Almalexia. It was originally slated for release, I think, a year or two ago. And to those of us on the outside, outside of Terraria built, it's very confusing about what happened there. It's like there was this big trailer that was, very epic in scale. We got to see this awesome city that was probably easily 100 times the size of Skyrim's Solitude. And then a year later, we hear that it's been completely scrapped. And what changed exactly?
Right. Okay. So, a couple things. Uh, the the trailer of that wasn't specifically, and it wasn't very clear about this, but the trailer that was released that showed Almalexia wasn't intended, it wasn't related in any way to an upcoming release. It was just a trailer to show off a very cool aspect of the mod that just happened to be Almalexia. Um, so, and that's understandable that people saw the video and thought, okay, they're showing the video of this. That means it's going to be released soon. I totally understand that, and that's definitely our fault for not clarifying that. Hey, this isn't something to expect in the next coming months or anything. Um, Another thing, second thing is that originally Almalexia, and I alluded to this earlier with comments on things can't be square or they can't be rectangle, and having arguments about it for a long time. But originally, Almalexia was a square, and it took up about 23 cells, including Mournhold in the center. Mournhold itself was 9, and Almalexia was comprised of the other, 12 or 13 cells, 14 cells in around the outside, and it was huge. So something like 600 interiors, which, by the way, that was a pain in the butt to link all those interiors, those door markers. Hope no one ever has to do that on their own. Would not wish that on even my worst enemy. So a lot of people decided it was a terrible design. Uh, and I say a lot. There are basically a couple people who are very outspoken in the project who basically were very, very outspoken about how design was, about how it didn't make any sense. It was just big for the sake of being big. And they had a very good point. It wasn't designed well as a city, and it wasn't designed well thematically with Great House Indoril. It didn't make sense if we were going to have this narrative for the house that the city was totally nonsensical in its design. And so we decided to scrap that and started planning on how it was going to look. The problem with the next iteration of that, which I think is the most recent one that people have probably seen, is it was redesigned as a circle by Neiman, our former head of exteriors, who's responsible for many of the amazing vistas that can be seen in our screenshots and our work. Much of the Velothi Mountains, a bunch of the Redoran settlements, not Bon Malur, Scamp is responsible for that one. But a lot of the great looks. The area around Narcissus, that's all Neiman. The problem is he didn't wait until we were finished with the planning to build the city. He just built the city. He took a lot of what we had said up to that point into consideration, and was more than willing to make adjustments. But there was unfortunately some backlash to that, saying, this is pointless. It undermines the whole point of planning for the city before we do the planning. So there was a lot of stepping on toes with him going ahead and making the city rather than waiting. And there's still some debate about how much can you plan for a city and how much has to be left up to uh, a masterful exterior modder who works with the construction set and makes changes on the fly. And the people are exterior modders. They want to implement their vision. They want to make cool things, and a lot of that magic and a lot of that fun is taken out of it when the entire city is planned down to a T. This building goes here, that building goes there. From a if there are any city planners or industrial designers out there, they're probably thinking, well, that makes sense. You want to plan the whole city out beforehand. They're probably thinking like that's ideal. But for people who are actually building the city, uh, cities grow organically, and it's fun to make the city the way that you want, obviously. And it's very hard to make a well planned city in the construction set, because even the best laid plans don't always translate perfectly to the construction set. And so there have to be some adjustments, and there's just been some disagreement, and it's just a very heated topic, and it was a very heated topic for a long time. And so we decided that it was best to kind of just shelve Almalexia and come back to that last after we had set everything else apart. Uh, some all the feelings and emotions had blown over, and so we're in the middle of working on planning for the rest of the Sacred East and Thur River Valley region. Once that stuff is finished, ideally Almalexia will be back in the planning stages, but it for now is completely on hold. And I know that bums out a lot of people, because it's really the crown jewel of the whole province. But we do want to do it right, and we also want to do it right without disenfranchising anybody and hurting anybody's, not necessarily avoiding hurting anybody's feelings, but we don't want to alienate anyone from the project over a city design. That's silly. So unfortunately, it's on hold for now, but hopefully it won't be for too much longer.
Oh yeah, and that is kind of understandable. Cities growing organically is something that is kind of hard to translate into the construction set and into games. I know Bethesda has been struggling with it for years. I mean, the Imperial City, for example, is not a very believable looking city in Oblivion. It's not organic at all. And that is a very important aspect, to get across with these major cities.
Right. As cool as that wheel design was, it kind of, and it might have been the AI as well that made it feel a little artificial. But I always take a second look at cities that are very meticulously designed, because they seem like they wouldn't fit almost. And it's hard, especially in games like that where they're medieval fantasies. It's hard enough to plan out a city in this day and age when you have all sorts of technology and other advances. But back in those times, when I mean, sure, you have magic because it's medieval fantasy, but still, designing a city to be so immaculate and so obviously artificially grown, um, it kind of, I wouldn't say makes me suspend my disbelief, or gives me trouble suspending my disbelief, but I don't know. I'm with you, and I prefer the more naturally grown cities, or towns that at least look like they developed naturally.
And sort of on a similar note, Tower Rebuilt has been through several iterations since it was founded, and as you mentioned earlier, it's like only one or two claims are probably still in the mod after all these years from the original set. Just how many times would you say that mainland Morrowind has, almost been finished, only to go back to the drawing board for quality control reasons, like sort of what happened with Almalexia?
Well, luckily, overall, the province as a whole has never had to be redone. Or we might as well just go ahead and start digging our own graves. But um, I think major regions probably have been redone. I know Necrom was rebuilt 3 times. Almalexia has gone through 4 iterations and is waiting on its fifth. Um, Regions in the Northeast have been redone. The 2 areas that have been released, well, there's been several, but the first two, Telvanus and Antediluvian Secrets, had large portions of their landscapes totally redone. The area that was in the Alpha, Map 4 and Map 5 historically, so the Alpha and then the lands north of that have all been redone. Map 4 area has been redone about twice. Map 5, the Nordic, the icy, snowy regions, I think that area has pretty much as a whole has only been redone once, and it's more or less finished now. Um, and then, of course, the indoor lands have been redone. Well, large parts of them have been redone. Some of them once, some of them 2, 3 times. So individually, I guess on average, a piece of land or a town or a region that you look at anywhere in game is safe to say on average has been redone 2 to 3 times.
And that seems like quite a bit of work has gone into redoing things for quality control reasons, and hopefully now Terra Built sort of has the planning ahead of time to sort of avoid that sort of thing in the future, right?
Right. The goal with planning is to avoid the necessity of redoing things um, for several reasons. Obviously, it's a waste of time to have to redo something. I mean, you've wasted your time in the beginning to if you end up having to redo it. But another aspect of that is if you plan after the fact, you almost always have to redo things because if you somehow manage to plan in a way that you don't have to redo anything, then you probably didn't actually do any planning. You just structured and molded your narrative around what was already there. And that's kind of dishonest planning. If you redo somebody's work, not only is that extra time, extra work, but if that person is still there, they might be upset about it and say, why is this being redone? We decided it was going to be the last time it was done when we did it last time. I don't want my work to be, wasted, blah, 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 which is that's a fine position to have. Nobody wants to see their work scrapped. They worked hard on it. And, they might leave the project or they might be gone and there might not be anyone there to redo it in the future and you might have to wait or other things, other reasons as well. So it's just better planning and more efficient work to plan things beforehand. And so that's what we hope to accomplish from here on out is make sure that we have everything planned out, still give some leeway for the aspect of it for landscape modders and city builders, but have everything planned out adequately beforehand so that we don't have to go through and redo all the stuff that is yet to come.
Oh yes, and going on to another question, a rather large number of modders have gone through the doors at Terra Built over, I think it's the last 13 years now. Terra Built is, I think, 13 years old now. And how many modders would you say have worked on Terra Built in total? I know that's probably an impossible thing to estimate.
Right. So overall, the number of people who have simply joined the forums, who have created an account on the forums, that number rests somewhere around 9 to 10,000 people. If you look at the current user count, you'll see, I think that's probably somewhere around 5,500, 52, 53, low 5,000s. But that's because we call, and we used to do this much more often, but we clean out our user base. A lot of people register and never activate their account or never log in the first place, or sometimes they're spam users. So those accounts get cleaned out, and sometimes people make a mistake, they have a typo, so they mess up their registration and they register again under almost the exactly identical, the exactly same username. And so that kind of accounts for a lot of orphaned accounts or accounts that just aren't used anymore. So probably around 9,000 easily have registered at a TR forum uh, in the course of history. Now, the number of contributing members is much less than that, obviously. Um, I would estimate probably somewhere around 600 people have contributed to TR, and that's anywhere from making a model or a texture, or writing a book, or building an interior claim, or writing a quest, designing a quest, uh, writing a song. I would say probably around 600 people, give or take another 100. So plus minus 100, I would say on average about 600 people have contributed to the project over the past uh, decade and some change.
And that is certainly quite a lot more than most modding projects, I should think. And, sort of going back in time, if someone had told you in 2002 that a project like Terra Rebuilt would endure for 13 years, would you have believed them?
Sort of. I would have believed them that we would still be together after, still be hanging out and whatnot after so long. I would have said, yeah, it's gonna be a lifelong thing. We'll be lifelong friends forever because this is an awesome group. Um, I probably would have not believed them that it would have taken this long, because as most people are aware, the project name is Tamriel Rebuilt and not Morrowind Rebuilt. And the reason for that is because originally we wanted to not only rebuild and re-add Morrowind to the game, like was originally planned by the developers, but we also wanted to add the rest of the continents in the game as well. And you've got to remember, this was the first time in the history of the Elder Scrolls that they were publishing their full construction set, their full developer tools. Well, their full world building tools. Uh, they didn't open source the engine or anything. I'm still holding out for that, but um, in the history of the franchise, and so we thought, we have the passion, uh, and now we have the tools. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do this. It took them maybe 4 or 5 years to build the game. We'll have many more people. We won't have the overbearing producers. Um, we won't have financial constrictions. We'll be able to build way more, way faster, and have fun doing it. And so I would have thought that, nah, 12 years from now, 13 years from now, we'll have finished Morrowind. We'll have probably finished Skyrim. We've probably going to have finished Argonia by then as well, moving on to Cyrodiil. Probably have a good portion of the continent done. And obviously, those were a little bit lofty goals, but we decided to keep the Tamriel Rebuilt name even after we realized, after maybe 2 or 3 years, that okay, the whole continent is not going to happen. And even after we decided the whole continent was not going to happen, we still thought we would be able to also do Skyrim for another 2 or 3 years. After that, it wasn't until about 2005 or so, right around the time that Oblivion was announced, that we realized, okay, oops, we're not going to be able to get this out. People are going to leave the Elder Scrolls 3 community for the Elder Scrolls 4 when it comes out, and we're not even finished with Morrowind yet. We got to focus on that. And so since then, we've pretty much been a Morrowind shop. But yeah, I definitely would have believed that we would be together, but not necessarily that we would still be working on Morrowind.
Sort of going into that, Terra Built is, sort of one of the oldest continuously worked on modding projects out of probably any modding community. And the thing is, though, is that when do you actually realistically think a mainland Morrowind will be finished?
So that's always a pretty difficult. I find that the most difficult thing to estimate. Not the Dres area, notwithstanding, all of that region, notwithstanding. I would say an idealistic estimate of having uh, released lands with NPCs and dialogue, and some quests, not fully implemented, not all the quests, but some quests. So interactive and playable to an extent. Um, I would say non-Dres. I would say probably it should be out by 2018, uh, hopefully. And again, I'm not super involved in the day to day anymore, so these numbers might be totally off. They might be spot on. Um, your guess is almost as good as mine. With Dres, could be another 2 years, could be another five. It really, honestly, it depends on our ability to obtain the assets we need, the game assets we need, and come to a decision on various planning things. I think landscape-wise, I think we'll have landscape finished much sooner. I think non-Dres areas, I think the landscape for non-map 6, so no Dres, no Narcissus, I think landscape is almost completely finished for all the other areas. Work is starting to begin on the Narcissus area. That's the southwestern part of the mainland. I think that might take another year or two, maybe three, depending on how quickly progress moves and how quickly we can get new assets. Because each new region, we need new and unique flora, as well as some fauna too. We need creatures to go with the landscape as well to make it fresh and exciting and engaging and believable, and lore accurate as well. But landscape is always going to be much quicker than playability as far as quests go, because they're just the numbers are just always there for interiors and exterior modders. I mean, those are the glory positions, I feel like, for modders. It's very visual to see that, so it's easier to brag and show off, and so I think that's where people gravitate toward those positions more so than dialogue. It's hard to write dialogue too, especially anybody of any language can be a great interior modder or exterior modder, but it's hard for people of other languages and cultures to write good dialogue in English. Even if they're proficient English speakers, it's hard to imagine dialogue in English. So I think dialogue and quests, it's kind of like naming a product. You can have the best product in the world, but naming it might be the hardest thing. Uh, Likewise, I think the playability aspect of it, the interactive parts of the mod, are what it will take a long time.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. But 2018 to 2022, that really doesn't sound like a too bad of an estimate. It sounds pretty optimistic, honestly, and I think most more players would be pretty fine with that, especially given the development history thus far. And speaking of sort of the end of the project, so to speak, back when Oblivion came out, Tamara Rebuilt started the Hammerfell project, as you mentioned, to bring the province of Hammerfell to the Oblivion engine. But that project died, separated a few years into production. If the Morrowind mainland is, ever finished, do you see Tamara Rebuilt moving on to a newer Bethesda game, or just sticking with Morrowind?
It certainly could. Um, I don't think it would be Tamriel rebuilt. I don't know if the project itself would just adopt a new project, a new province, um, or mod or goal. I think most likely is many or most of the people still interested in modding at that point would reorganize into a new group with a new name at that point. But I think as a whole, like the project itself, would not move on to that, because I think Tamriel Rebuilt has always been a Morrowind team. I think the infrastructure is there for Morrowind. I mean, and that's another thing. The forum software, which is an integral part of our mod and our process, is designed specifically for Morrowind. It handles Morrowind data files. It handles the Morrowind map. Uh, the naming schemes and everything are from Morrowind. Um, so they'd have to do a total retooling of the claims browser if they wanted to use that process. I know other province mods get along fine without the intensive backend system that we have. But if the team here wanted to move on and do something else for a new Elder Scrolls game, I think they would have to start an entirely new group. It may be a lot of the same people, like I said, but I don't think it would be Tamriel rebuilt, because I think the spirit of this mod, and I think the energy and the history of this mod, everything that goes into making this mod what it is, I think all of that rests in Morrowind. The Elder Scrolls 3, not the Elder Scrolls in general. I think this was a magic game for a lot of people. It has a lot of value, a lot of nostalgia, um, and I think that's what makes the project special, is that the people have such a passion about this game in particular, this storyline in particular, and in many ways this community in particular.
Oh yes, definitely. Morrowind has sort of a lasting influence that just kind of sticks with people, and sort of going on then. If mainland Morrowind is ever finished, do you see Tower Rebuilt possibly moving to perhaps Blackmarsh? Since I imagine the border between Morrowind and Blackmarsh is going to be a bit difficult because you don't have mountains there. I believe it just sort of starts going into the marsh a bit, and so it's a bit harder to get the sort of transition there without doing a part of the Black Marsh province when you're doing the borders of House Dres and House Halalu.
Um, it probably would be largely the same answer. And again, I'm not the arbiter for what the project decides to do. Um, I think, however, once Morrowind is finished, I think that will be, and this is just my guess. I think once, if and when Morrowind is finished, or the mod is finished, I should say, um, that will probably be the end of Tamriel Rebuilt as a project. That's my guess. Just because for so many people, I mean, the influx is nowhere near what it used to be, because Oblivion, even, and especially Skyrim, are the projects that are, they're the games that are getting all the new players. There are still some new ones every now and then, yes, but I mean, it's nowhere near the amount of new people in the community today can't hold a candle to the number of people that were arriving all the time back. Even 5 years ago, several years after Oblivion was out. And I think another Elder Scrolls release would harm that number even more. But I think that aside, I think it's still people have spent their lives in many ways with this game. A lot of people, most modders for the project, I think, are in their 20s or their teens, as it has always been. And I think once they grow older, they tend to move on um, from Morrowind modding, at least, is what I've seen. And I think once the Morrowind province is finished by Tamriel Rebuilt, I think that's going to see a vast majority of members kind of hang up their hat and pat each other on the back and move on from that part of their life.
Sort of something interesting to consider, since I kind of think of modding as something you don't really ever stop doing, really, because modding is kind of an addictive property to it. And but moving on, what do you think about the Open Morrowind project? And are there any plans to make Terra Rebuilt Open Morrowind compatible? Because there's a lot of talk of Open Morrowind sort of causing a new golden age for the Morrowind modding community, so to speak.
Sure, there's a lot of hope for OpenMW and what that entails. Um, as far as compatibility goes, Tamriel Rebuilt should be compatible out of the box with OpenMW. just like all mods, since it's a pure, at least version 1.0 is supposed to be a pure rebuilt representation of the original game that includes mod support and the OpenMWCS, as it's called now. Once it has new features, we might consider moving to that. We know there are some bugs. For example, the Morrowind code patch is required to play Tamriel Rebuilt if you want to visit certain cells. There's one cell currently in Almalexia where it's just if there is a height change of a certain amount, it will simply cause a crash to desktop. And other quirks like that, other cells have their own quirks that are just documented in the annals of TR history. But we know that OpenMW should not have those bugs because they're engine specific. And since OpenMW is on a new engine, we're hoping that means new features as well. None of that is guaranteed by the OpenMW team. They're all potential features on the post 1.0 roadmap. But if they include enough features for us to consider moving, that plus the increased stability of the game and the ability for just better gaming experience, optimized code leads to better performance in the game. So there's definitely a lot of people in the project who are keeping an eye on and big supporters of OpenMW, just in terms of its success and what it means for the community, as well as in terms of what it means for Tamriel Rebuilt and our chances of moving to that platform.
Sort of speaking about moving to that platform, are there any features like world spaces or dynamic water heights that could be included in an Open Morrowind that Tamriel Rebuilt might consider using?
Definitely. I think world spaces probably would be used in a couple places. We're big fans of one world, though, as far as we don't like the system of having to open a door to get into a city. It's very artificial. It's not organic. It doesn't feel smooth. It doesn't feel real, so to speak. And definitely or height per cell, dynamic water heights, that would be a huge draw. Any other number of optimizations or bug fixes that OpenMW would bring, better handling of physics would be another plus, like we mentioned earlier. We could sit here and drum up a laundry list of things we'd like to see. But I think a lot of the things that OpenMW would like to add are definitely things that we would take advantage of, because we're a pretty big project, and so we take advantage of pretty much every opportunity we can find to make the mod better or to add new features. There isn't really anything we don't do. I think maybe we don't script music, I think, to play at certain times, but most other abilities that you can do in the engine, I think we at least have considered using, if not already use. So yeah, any new features in OpenMW, I think would definitely be very attractive from that standpoint.
Oh yes, and as you mentioned, a sort of world spaces using to sort of divide cities from the overworld is something that I think Bethesda used mostly because of console limitations, and that's really not a concern for a PC mod like Tamriel Rebuilt. And sort of moving on to the next topic of conversation, the Morrowind modding community has been going strong for nearly 13 years now. What do you think keeps this community so vibrant after such a long time? I mean, last year Morrowind turned 12 years old, and we still had over 300 new mods released in the community by an estimated 200 plus modders, and that's pretty good for a game that's so old.
Right. I think it's got to be the passion. a lot of it might be nostalgia, and a lot of it might be familiarity. Uh, but I think for the people who still stick around and who still mod, and of course, let me also say that it's probably discovery for new people. Anybody who comes in late still discover they have the later you arrive from a certain point of view, the better you have it because the more there will be, like the more the community has done. Um, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing. Some people like to be the first to do something. Um, some people also like to just browse the history of the Morrowind modding community and see, wow, they've done so much stuff. But I really think the reason why people still stick around and still come back and still mod to this day, I think, is just the passion. Um, I mean, that's really the only reason you would do something willingly for 13 years is that you just love it, and um, unless of course, I don't think anybody's getting paid massive amounts of money to be a Morrowind modder. If they are, I need to get their number. But you know, it's just this is just a lot of people's first love. It's their most nostalgic memory of gaming, and from the early turn of the century. It's really, I mean, it was groundbreaking in so many ways in its day, and the story is really magical. I think it's just the right mix of sci-fi with fantasy, with steampunk, and I mean it's got elements from everything, and it doesn't do one thing too much, which I think is one of its selling points. But yeah, I would have to just say that the members that are still around today are just the ones that find this subject something to be passionate about.
Oh yes, definitely. And sort of wrapping up with our last couple of questions. Do you think there's anything the community should be doing in order to keep going and expand in the coming years?
I think I'm not sure of any initiatives, but I think it would be good to focus on friendliness and growing and being supportive. I know in any community, when you join as a new member, there's always that sense of uncertainty. You want to make sure that you fit in. You want to learn the ropes. You don't want to step on any toes or make any awkward mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, and everybody has that growing phase anytime they come into a new community or start doing a new activity. But I think being friendly and supportive, and helping to teach others how to mod and how to sharing in the creativity, I think is probably the best thing that they can do. Also, not probably avoid I would say avoid dissing other games. I know personally I like to hate on certain games. Oblivion is certainly my least favorite of the Elder Scrolls games that I've played, but I think dissing on other, just have a by that I just mean have a positive attitude with other games, because some people, for example, I dabbled in Neverwinter Nights uh, modding for a time, and for a very short time, and I didn't really interact with the community there. But if I did, and they had been, standoffish, if they had said, "Oh, Morrowind modding is crap compared to Neverwinter Nights modding," or something like that, then I would have been turned off, because I was coming from Morrowind modding. It's what I knew and what I loved, and to have somebody belittle my previous experiences probably wouldn't have been uh, very fun for me. So I would say, just be positive. Definitely help out anytime you see an opportunity. Um, don't be afraid to start a discussion about anything, or to ask, or to start. Just because there's not as much activity every day now as there was, 5, 10 years ago, it doesn't mean that there aren't still people who are interested in reading and discussing these topics. There's still new topics being posted in the lore forum every day. I mean, the 12, well, all the time. 12 years after the game came out, almost 13 years now after the game came out, they're still debating what certain things mean, and we're still seeing new mods. So just keep your enthusiasm up, and try to be positive and supportive is my two uh, taglines, I suppose.
And the Morrowind modding community is really, I think, already kind of, positive based. It's a very supportive community. Feedback is typically friendly and constructive. I don't think we've had too many issues with, sort of negative comments in the Morrowind modding community in general in the past couple of years. But sort of moving on to one of our very last questions, do you have any advice for budding new Morrowind modders, or perhaps modders looking to submit their first showcase to Tamriel Rebuilt?
Sure. Just like any creative process, don't be afraid to get messy. Try things, even if you don't find it interesting or if you don't quite get it. Try it anyway. Try your hand at every aspect, because you never know what you might love. If you might think you'll be totally crap at writing dialogue or making quests or writing in the scripting language, or you may end up being totally awesome at it. You might be the future writer of the new Morrowind Scripting for Dummies book. You never know. So definitely don't be afraid to try new aspects of modding, or new styles or new genres. Maybe you only do lore-friendly stuff. Maybe branch out and take some time and do some crazy, ridiculous, samurai mod or something like that. Some anime mod or whatever. Don't be afraid to mix things up. Also, don't be afraid to read and find as many tutorials as you can. Even if you don't understand them, try to read through them and follow them. Every little bit helps. And finally, don't be afraid to ask questions, because, like you mentioned, and like I said in the answer, it's a pretty friendly place. At Tamriel Rebuilt, we try to be friendly and supportive as well, in addition to and around the community. So don't be afraid to ask questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? What's a good way for me to do X, Y, Z? And we'll point you in the right direction. We'll share some tutorials with you, some tricks. You have not because you ask not, basically. So somebody once told me. So ask away, and the sky's the limit there.
Very good advice. And, finally, is there anyone in the community you'd like to give a shout out to?
I'm not sure. There's so many modders that have done some really awesome stuff. I would just have to give a shout out to the community as a whole for being just awesome and being so passionate about things and having such an awesome imagination and being so talented. And for being there in the first place, for me to discover, to be here today. I certainly wasn't the first Morrowind modder, and I certainly won't be the last either. So I think that's pretty awesome.
All right, that pretty much wraps up all the questions I have for you. Well, not literally. I could ask a ton more questions about Tamriel Rebuilt. There's just so much we could talk about with a major project like Tamriel Rebuilt, but that pretty much wraps up all the questions I've prepared today. Maybe in the future we could do a Morrowind modding podcast with multiple members at Tamriel Rebuilt. But for now, thank you for agreeing to do this interview.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.